Have you ever looked at a gun in a video game and wondered, would this gun actually be functional? Is it designed well? Does it perform realistically? Well, I think about that stuff all the time. In this series, I like to review video game guns and rank them in a tier list based on their overall design and implementation. I look at them from both a realistic perspective and a gamer's perspective, so I consider a lot of factors such as functionality, attention to detail, animations, performance, and of course, the fun factor. This time, we're looking at the guns in Helldivers 2. A lot of science fiction games tend to have really tacky gun designs that are littered with all kinds of greebles and sci-fi nonsense. So I'm glad to say, that ain't the case with Helldivers 2. These guns aren't complete sci-fi nonsense. They're grounded in reality and have functional designs. Dare I say, these are the best sci-fi guns I've ever seen. I've always been doing everything wrong videos, but the guns in Helldivers 2 are perfect and have no issues whatsoever. So instead of going over everything wrong, I'm gonna go over everything right with the guns in Helldivers 2. Now join me in this glorious celebration of Super Earth's mighty arsenal. This message has been approved by the Ministry of Truth. Okay, I think I've got the Ministry fooled with that intro. I know those guys don't manually review videos past the first minute. Just like YouTube, they rely on broken AI algorithms. So now that I prefaced this video correctly, I can say whatever the hell I want. That's right, boys. That intro was a ruse. These guns actually suck. Most people may see nothing wrong with them because they look fine on the surface. But once you really examine these guns, then oh my goodness, there's a ton of boneheaded mistakes and design flaws that destroy my immersion. No doubt, these critical design flaws are all due to Super Earth's budget cuts. There's so much wrong with these guns that this video is over 2 hours long, and that's just a small portion of them. Right now, I'm just covering the base game ballistic firearms and their variants. There's a lot of guns in this game, so I'll have to split this into a few parts. And before you go and drop a 500 kilogram bomb on my head, I do genuinely think the guns in Helldivers 2 are pretty solid. They're infinitely better than the slop you see in Starfield, but they're also far from perfect and have plenty of room for improvement. They may call me a traitor for exposing these flaws, but actually, I'm a true patriot. I must expose these flaws so we can improve these guns and make them better tools for serving managed democracy. To rate these guns properly, I'll be assigning them 2 different ratings. The first will be a tier list that focuses on things like visual design, functionality, practicality, and animations and technique. The second will be a star rating that evaluates their performance, in-game balancing, and how fun they are to use. To be clear, this isn't a typical meta-style ranking. I do consider in-game balancing, but I like to focus more on how realistic their performance is. A gun may be well balanced in terms of gameplay, but if the performance is inaccurate to real life, if it's balanced the wrong way, then I'll have to take away points. At the same time, if a gun is horribly underpowered and unfun to use when it doesn't need to be, then I'll also take away points for that. The gun has to be realistic, properly balanced, and fun to achieve a high rating. That may sound like a catch-22, but I assure you, it is possible. You'll find out that this game especially has a huge problem with balancing. A lot of the guns are severely underpowered and don't perform how they should, which is quite ironic, because Arrowhead markets Helldivers 2 as being a grounded sci-fi game where you destroy aliens with overpowered weapons, and yet a lot of the guns fall victim to typical shitty video game balancing tropes and are terribly unfun to use as a result. They keep on ruining the balancing to make it into a grunt fantasy, but by doing that, they're actually making the guns less realistic and less fun. Well, I'll show them what a true grunt fantasy looks like. The monkey paw has curled, so I'll be going over the most minute details to determine just how unrealistic these guns truly are. First up is the standard issue AR-23 Liberator. It's a bullpup assault rifle that's heavily inspired by the Tavor. It's like a combination between the old SAR model and the new X95. It's got skeletonized holes in the middle, and the charging handle is up front like the SAR, while the overall shape and bulkiness is more like the X95. But the Liberator is even bulkier all around, especially the handguard. It's quite chunky. Guns these days are shifting towards having thin handguards, not only because they're lighter, but also because they allow for better recoil control, With a thin handguard, you can get a high and aggressive C-clamp, which enables you to manhandle the muzzle rise. There's really no advantage in having a chunky, oversized handguard like this. They really ought to slim it down to make it more ergonomic. Simply adding weight to the front end is another way to reduce recoil, but past a certain point, you get diminishing returns. So you're much better off with a thinner handguard, either way. It's literally the best of both worlds. You get a lighter gun that's easier to control. All this extra bulk is mostly dead weight that isn't helping. But of course they would choose to make the Liberator a bullpup, because everyone knows that bullpups are inherently sci-fi space guns. It's quite a common trope in sci-fi, but I don't think it's a bad one. Bullpups are better on paper after all, so at some point in the future, it is possible that bullpups will take over. You get more barrel length for a shorter overall package, so that means you can have a smaller gun that can fit into smaller spaces without compromising the velocity of the bullet. But the reason why bullpups haven't taken over yet is because most people just don't like how they handle. All the weight is shifted backwards, so the balance is way different from a conventional rifle. That different center of gravity can be an advantage though. With all the weight shifted back, you don't have to put as much effort in with your support arm. But one thing you can't get used to is how terrible the triggers are. They're not very crisp or responsive because the firing mechanism is so far away from the trigger. Shit's so bad, I thought I had the safety on by accident, but no. The trigger pull is just that atrocious. Another thing to consider is that bullpups tend to have higher felt recoil and higher muzzle rise. There's not much space between your shoulder and where the cartridge goes boom. There's nothing to cushion the blow, so you feel the force of recoil a lot more, especially when compared to an AR with a buffer tube. And with all the weight being shifted to the rear end, that means there's less weight up front to drive down the muzzle, so you get a higher muzzle rise too. That reality really isn't reflected in Helldivers though. The Liberator's recoil is very smooth and easy to control, but I can't pin the blame on this gun alone. Pretty much every single gun in this game has unrealistically low recoil. Bullpups aren't very good for extreme precision, but precision doesn't matter when you're gunning down bugs in full auto at close range. Like I said, on paper, bullpups are great, but in practice, well, most people just don't like them. On Super Earth though, it doesn't matter what the soldier likes. If they want everyone using bullpups, then everyone is going to be using bullpups. In terms of gameplay, the Liberator is pretty decent. It's not crazy good, but it's not terrible either. It's a solid rifle that gets the job done. It's got a moderate fire rate with moderate damage, and it's fairly easy to control. It works perfectly fine for lower level missions, but once you get to Super Helldive, well, it simply won't hold up, especially against enemies with medium or heavy armor. That's the big downside holding this gun back. It has low penetration. So, if you try to shoot an enemy with medium or heavy armor, the bullet will bounce right off and deal 0 damage. I think they should buff the Liberator to have medium penetration. It is a rifle after all, so I don't see why it has the same penetration as the pistols. Rifle bullets are way faster and carry way more energy than pistol rounds, so they're naturally better at penetrating armor. This gun in particular is chambered in 5.5 by 50mm. That's very similar in size to the real-life 5.56 by 45. The casing is just slightly longer. According to the wiki, the bullet is 69 grains, and the velocity is just under 3,000 feet per second. Again, that is very similar to 5.56. A 62 grain 5.56 travels at just about 3,000 feet per second. So basically, this 5.5 cartridge is the Helldivers version of 5.56. It's extremely similar in size, weight, and velocity. It's also kinda lame how this gun has quad rails, and yet, you can only use 2 of them. You can mount an optic on the top rail, and an attachment on the bottom rail, but that's it. You can't use the other 2 on the side. Like, how come I can't have a grip on the bottom, a laser on the side, with a flashlight on the other? Well, you can get all that stuff as combo attachments, but dang it, I want to be able to attach them all separately. I can't really blame this gun alone. The attachment system in Helldivers is very limited. You only got 4 attachment slots: optics, underbarrel, muzzle, and maybe a different magazine. It varies from gun to gun. That brings me to my next point. The standard magazine on the Liberator looks like it holds 30 rounds, but it actually holds, 45? A 45 round magazine would stick out way more. For comparison, this is what my Tavor looks like with a 30 round magazine, and this is what it looks like with a 40 round magazine. As you can see, it sticks out a lot more than the Liberator's magazine. A hypothetical 45 rounder would be a smidge longer than this. I would love to show you how that looks, but 45 round 5.56 mags aren't really a thing. However, there are 45 round 5.45 AK mags. As you can see, they are quite long. It's the same deal with the short magazine too. It looks like a 20 rounder, but it holds 30. Funnily enough, it seems that the drum magazine is underloaded. It says it holds 60, but it should hold more. For comparison, here's what my Tavor looks like with a 60-round drum. If you put them side by side, the Helldivers drum mag is a little bit bigger. It almost looks like a 75-round AK drum. It's pretty amazing how they managed to mess up the capacity for literally every single magazine. It's either too much or too little. Not a single one is accurate. And I should note, all the magazines I have here are not high capacity. For the sake of complying with YouTube's advertiser-friendly guidelines, I've pinned them all to 29 rounds. Therefore, they are not defined as high-capacity magazines. I got no problem with them making 45 rounds the standard capacity. It's totally necessary when dealing with the endless hordes of bugs. But if they're going to make these standard a 45-round magazine, then they should make it look like a 45-round magazine. As is, this shit low-key bugs the hell out of me. It's not very immersive. To fix all this nonsense, they should correct the capacities for all the magazines, and introduce a few more. The short mag should hold 20, the standard mag should hold 30, and the drum should hold 75. There should also be an extended mag that holds 40, a quad stack that holds 50, and a smaller drum that holds 60. Better yet, they should add a huge 100-round double drum, or a comically long 100-round quad stack. That would be epic. Having a capacity that high would be very efficient for delivering democracy. Besides that, I think the optics are pretty slick. The Reflex Mark II is my favorite. It looks just like my Seymour Red Dot, so yes, it's pretty darn realistic. The magnified optics are solid options too, but I don't like how they punch you in the face when firing. The first-person recoil animation is way too dramatic. It looks like you get a black eye every time you shoot. I guess that might happen when shooting something high caliber, but it surely ain't a problem with 5.56. The recoil is very tame. The gun barely moves. I don't know if it was intentional for the first-person recoil to be this dramatic, but either way, they should really tune it down so it doesn't give you a seizure. It's quite ironic how the guns have unrealistically low muzzle rise, and yet the visual recoil is absurdly high. I think the worst part about this gun has got to be the charging handle. It's on the right side. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a charging handle on the right side. A lot of guns do that, but with this type of charging handle, it would be really awkward to operate since it's so far forward. Not only do you waste your time by taking your hand off the grip, but you really gotta reach for it. So yeah, it works, but it's not very convenient. If I try to recreate this animation by using my Tavor left-handed, then yeah, it feels really awkward and unergonomic. It would be a lot more ergonomic if they had it on the left side, you know, like the Tavor. It's not very desirable that the charging handle is reciprocating either. With a reciprocating charging handle, you have to be real careful with your grip, or else the charging handle will smack your hand and potentially break a thumb or finger. If the charging handle is attached to the bolt, like an AK, then it shouldn't be a problem, because it's nowhere near your support arm. But for a charging handle that's above the handguard, that could pose a problem. Well actually, this handguard is so bulky that your hand is far away enough for it to not be an issue. But if the gun was slimmed down, like how it should be, then yeah, that charging handle would be a problem. It doesn't help that the Liberator is missing a bolt release. You can't simply press a button to send the bolt forward on an empty reload. You always have to rack the charging handle, which makes reloads much slower than they should be. It almost seems like Arrowhead did this very deliberately, probably for the sake of some twisted balancing logic. They want reloads to be slower to make the game artificially harder. In other words, they want us to suffer. But in reality, charging handles aren't used very often on modern rifles. You only need to rack it once for the first magazine, then on subsequent reloads, you can use the bolt release. With the Tavor, for example, the bolt locks open after you run out, and you can slam it shut with the bolt release. It's conveniently placed right behind the magwell, so as soon as you place in the magazine, you can quickly hit the bolt release with your thumb and immediately get back to shooting. Low-key, the Tavor has really good ergonomics. You can reload it just as fast, maybe even faster than an AR-15. You'd think a futuristic space gun would have even better ergonomics than our modern-day rifles, or it would at least be on par. But in the Helldivers universe, it's the opposite. The Tavor devolved into the Liberator, which is shittier in every aspect. Even worse, the magazine release seems to be non-existent. With the X95, it's right next to the trigger, so you can easily tap it with your trigger finger right before you take out the mag. With the older SAR model, it's got a paddle next to the magwell, so you hit it with your left hand as you take out the mag. Whichever way is better comes down to personal preference, and personally, I prefer the SAR over the X95. When it comes to the Liberator, it doesn't have either of these mag releases. The only possible thing that looks like a magazine release is this little square here. I guess it looks like a mag release if you squint hard enough, but even if we assume it is, it's in the most unergonomic spot possible. you would have to take your right hand off the grip and reach backwards for it. But your character doesn't do that. They just rip out the magazine with brute strength. I suppose it is possible to do a reach around and hit it with your left hand as you take out the magazine. That is something you have to do with certain HK guns that don't have paddles due to gay import laws. But with this mag release, it's so high up that there is no possible way to reach it when doing a reach around. So you know what? I changed my mind. I think the magazine release is the worst part about this gun. But hey, at least the fire selector's in the right spot. And yes, this game does allow you to switch firing modes. You can switch between single fire, burst, and full auto. I'm not sure why you would ever want to use those other two modes though, because full auto is absolutely necessary in this game. There's so many fucking enemies. But it sure is immersive that they gave you the option to switch. But what's not immersive is that there's no option for full auto on the fire selector. Either they gotta replace the burst fire selection with full auto, or add another selection, so there's 4 in total. I think it'd be easier to simply replace the burst selection for full auto. It's not like anybody uses burst fire anyway. But hey, the fire selector is ambidextrous, so that gives it a small point towards its ergonomic score. You see, most bullpups these days are ambidextrous. They allow the user to change which side the ejection port is on. With a normal rifle, a lefty can get away with shooting a right-handed gun. The casings may hit their arm, but it's not guaranteed. With a bullpup though, well, it's pretty much guaranteed to launch casings right into their face, or support arm. So that's why bullpups need to be ambidextrous. They're borderline unusable for lefties otherwise. But it appears Super Earth doesn't care about left-handed people. The Liberator's ejection port only opens up on the right side. There is no option to switch it. I suppose that could line up with the lore though. Perhaps on Super Earth, everyone is forced to be right-handed, so if they spot a kindergartner writing with their left hand, they break their left arm and re-educate them into a right-hander. That makes perfect sense. Let's go with that. And if you really want to, you could always excuse these shitty ergonomics with lore reasons. Like hey, the ergonomics are shitty because Super Earth doesn't care about giving their soldiers good guns. They just throw their grunts cheap guns that are barely functional and say, here, go kill bugs. Basically, these guns are mass-produced for soldiers that die right as they leave the hellpod. Then again, it's not like it's that costly to produce a rifle with decent ergonomics. If anything, all this extra bulk would make the guns more costly, because it requires more materials. You'd think they would make their guns as light as possible to save on material cost, but for whatever reason, they're going out of their way to make their guns excessively bulky. I do like the concept of the Liberator, but man, the ergonomics are dog water. To make this rifle better, they need to slim it down, put the charging handle on the left side, make it non-reciprocating, and give it a bolt release and a proper magazine release. Then, it would be perfect. So basically, just make it like the Tavor. I think the overall design and aesthetic of the gun is pretty good. It's straightforward and utilitarian. There's nothing too fancy or frilly. It fits the role of a standard issue assault rifle. It's not optimized in the slightest, but it would be functional. So, it's way better than any of the slop you see in Starfield. I ain't going easy on Helldivers though. I'm holding them to a high standard. The Liberator isn't terrible, but it's not exactly great either. In terms of function and design, I'll give the Liberator a C-tier rating. For performance and balancing, I'll give it 3 stars. It's an okay tool for protecting democracy. Next is the AR-23P, the Liberator Penetrator. As you can tell, it's a variant of the Liberator that has an extended handguard and a long barrel. Besides the ugly cream paint job, the main thing that sets this one apart is that it uses special armor-penetrating rounds, hence the name, Penetrator. But I don't see why they need a whole new gun specifically made for armor-piercing rounds. Like, why can't we use these bullets in the regular Liberator? It would be pretty neat if you could switch ammunition while in a mission. But no. Instead, you have to bring a whole different rifle. I don't know, man. It's a video game. Anyway, the Penetrator has medium penetration, which is what I said the regular Liberator should have. So, if you ask me, I think the Penetrator should have high penetration. For a real-life comparison, rifle rounds like 5.56 are inherently armor-piercing. It can easily pierce through level 1 and level 2 armor, no problem. But with level 3 plates, not so much. Level 3 plates were specifically designed to stop intermediate rifle rounds, like 5.56. So of course, there's special armor-piercing 5.56 rounds that can pierce level 3 plates. But those bullets can be stopped by level 4 plates. If we use this same logic for Helldivers, low-caliber pistol rounds should have low penetration. They can only pierce level 1 armor. All intermediate rifles should have medium penetration. They can pierce level 2 armor. But these rifles could potentially have high-level penetration if they use special armor-piercing ammo. The marksman rifles shoot even bigger bullets, so they should have high penetration by default. But again, with special armor-piercing ammo, the penetration could go even higher to pierce level 4 armor. I guess you would call it very high penetration in Helldivers. So that's the problem. There is no very high penetration level. There's only 3. Low, medium, and high. There are more levels if you count the anti-tank weapons, but I'm only talking about the regular firearms here. They really ought to add a couple more levels of penetration, because as is, the whole penetration system is far too simplified, and there's not much variety between the guns. You need to have more levels to distinguish the rifles from the pistols, and to distinguish the big guns from the regular rifles. It's kind of ridiculous that snipers have the same penetration as pistols, and a revolver has the same penetration as an anti-material rifle. The anti-material rifle should be a couple levels above everything else. Call it extreme penetration or something. The way I look at it, there should be no less than 5 levels of penetration for the regular firearms, and there should be at least 8 in total if you want to count the anti-tank weapons. The 20mm autocannon should be even higher than the APW. Let's call that insane penetration. And the 85mm recoilless rifle would be a level above that. Let's call it turbo penetration. And the highest level of penetration would go to the giant bombs in artillery, like the 500 kilo bomb and the 380 barrage. That level shall be called unstoppable force, and it would be able to penetrate literally everything. Of course, they would have to add more armor levels for everything to be evened out. When I say the penetrator should have high penetration, I don't mean it should be able to penetrate Hulk armor. I'm just saying it should have higher penetration than the other assault rifles that have medium penetration. The Hulk should have more than just plain heavy armor. It should have extra heavy armor that can only be penetrated by level 5 extreme penetration. Arrowhead should rework the armor system too, and introduce more tiers. It would be quite a hassle, but it is necessary if they want to make a more realistic and a more balanced penetration system. I still appreciate Helldivers for having a penetration and armor system in the first place though. Most shooters completely ignore it, or they have a super simple system that revolves around percentage reductions, rather than having thresholds. Anyway, that's enough about my penetration rant. Back to the Penetrator. I can't really blame this gun for not having the correct level of penetration, because the whole penetration system is lacking depth. As is, the Penetrator is still a decent rifle that can get the job done. Its raw DPS kinda sucks, but its penetration power is what makes it useful. A lot of enemies have medium armor, especially on higher difficulty, so the Liberator isn't very useful against them. The bullets bounce right off, but the Penetrator can pierce that armor no problem. The only thing the regular Liberator has over the Penetrator is raw damage and DPS. The Penetrator's damage is 65, while the Liberator's damage is 90. So that's the trade-off. Do you want more damage with low penetration, or less damage with higher penetration? I don't think that's very realistic though. Armor-piercing rounds don't magically deal less damage than regular bullets. If anything, they're more damaging overall because they carry more energy. This is just a video game balancing thing. So, for gameplay reasons, I guess it's fine. If you had to pay for each bullet, then yes, the armor-piercing ammo should be a direct upgrade, rather than having a trade-off. But for a multiplayer game where you don't have to pay for ammo, then I suppose the trade-off is fine. Otherwise, there would be zero reason to use the regular Liberator. But should the trade-off be this extreme? A 20-point difference in damage is pretty huge. Before the recent balance patch, it used to be 60 versus 80. Now it's 65 versus 90. I would have expected them to narrow the gap, not increase it. I haven't done any extensive testing since the new patch, but it does seem like the Penetrator is underpowered compared to the regular Liberator. And when you compare it to the new Coyote, oh yeah, it's totally outclassed. The Coyote has medium penetration, but does 75 damage, and it has fire damage on top of that too. So it's just better in every aspect. Once you get this thing, there is no reason to use the Penetrator. If it were up to me, I would set the Penetrator's damage to 75 and give it high penetration. I don't think the Penetrator is downright terrible as is. It is usable, but it has been power crept quite a lot, especially with the most recent weapons and balancing changes. In some cases, an armor-piercing round will trade weight for higher velocity, so I guess for those particular bullets, you could argue that they deal less raw damage. But the difference in damage would be rather minor. It should be more like a 10% decrease, not 28%. And there's all different kinds of armor-penetrating rounds. Some are lighter and faster, but some are actually heavier and slower. And some are just packed with more powder, so they're straight up faster without sacrificing weight. The Penetrator uses a bullet that's the same weight, and it's slightly faster than the regular 5.5, so it's just a direct upgrade then. The only difference, I'm guessing, is that they made the bullet with a dense metal, like steel or tungsten, and they packed it with more powder. That would also explain why the Penetrator has slightly more recoil. The bullet has more energy, so the Penetrator recoils a little harder, despite it being a longer and heavier gun. Now if you want to say the Liberator is using hollow points, then sure, it does make sense for the raw damage to be that much higher. Hollow points are designed to expand in flesh and create bigger wound cavities. Meanwhile, a regular or armor-piercing bullet would go straight through. but there's no mention of the Liberator using hollow points. Either they gotta adjust the damage numbers, or specify that it's using hollow points. And if it is using hollow points, then that would explain why it has light penetration. But even then, it would still have more penetration than a typical pistol round. Overall, I like the Penetrator. It's a neat gun. I don't have much to add about the design, because it's just a variant of the Liberator. So everything I said there already applies to this one. Just like the Liberator, the Penetrator gets a C-tier rating for its design. For performance though, I'll give the Penetrator 3.5 stars. It might have worse stats than the Liberator, but I decided to give it a slightly higher rating because it penetrates armor, like a rifle should. It's a solid tool for serving democracy. Before I move on to the next gun, I gotta say, I really appreciate how Helldivers 2 has such a strong focus on air support and artillery. Infantry can only do so much work after all. When you get swarmed by dozens of enemies, a regular gun just won't cut it. It's best to call in a jet to blow them all to smithereens. Or even better, remove a whole chunk of the battlefield with the artillery barrage. I kinda wish they'd give us the option to call in a tank too. That would be awesome. But sadly, there's no drivable tanks in Helldivers 2. But you know what game does allow you to use tanks? That's right, baby. It's today's sponsor, War Thunder! War Thunder is by far the most comprehensive vehicular combat game ever made. There's over 2,500 war machines in total. Tanks, airplanes, helicopters, warships, from every era, from every major country. You name it, War Thunder's got it. And all these vehicles are highly detailed and super accurate to real life. They're so accurate, it's almost like they have the blueprint. It's not just about looks though. The coolest part about War Thunder is the gameplay. Just like in real life, every vehicle has armored areas and weak points. So, as you can guess, it's best to shoot vehicles in their weak points. If you hit heavy armor at the wrong angle, your shot will glance off and do no damage. But, if you hit them in the right spot, the shot will go right through and take out the whole crew. So not only do you need high skill and pinpoint accuracy, you also need to have knowledge of every vehicle to come out on top. So War Thunder is the perfect game for those who crave realistic gameplay and love learning about military vehicles. All around, it's supremely immersive. You really feel like you're there on the battlefield. War Thunder is entirely free to play, and you can download it right now by using my links in the description. It's available on PC, consoles, and mobile devices too. So that means you can play War Thunder no matter where you go. For the icing on the cake, all new and returning players on PC and console will get a sweet bonus pack that includes 100,000 silver and 7 days of a premium account. On the opposite end, we have the AR-23A Liberator Carbine. As you can tell, it's a short barrel variant of the Liberator. Its goal is to be as compact as possible. They shortened both the front end and the stock. They also traded the big knuckle guard for a regular trigger guard, which makes the overall profile ever so slightly slimmer. Besides the difference in length, the carbine comes with a cool camouflage paint job, a pouch for storing Skittles and crayons, and a mag-pull mag assist, which allows you to pull out magazines a little bit faster. I really dig the commando vibe, and it's absolutely mandatory that you keep the camouflage on when dropping into a heavily forested planet. If you dare take off that camo, then you'll be spotted and killed instantly. Not from enemies though, it's cause your democracy officer would dome you for committing an offense to fashion. In terms of performance, the carbine is a direct upgrade to the Liberator. It has the same damage, penetration, and capacity, but it has better handling and a faster fire rate. The default Liberator shoots at 640 rounds per minute and has a DPS of 960, while the carbine shoots at a blistering 920 rounds per minute, which gives it a DPS of 1380. That makes it one of the best assault rifles in the whole game, especially once you unlock the drum mag for it. It's like a mini buzzsaw machine gun. It's especially good for clearing out the endless waves of small bugs and voteless. The only downside is that it has light penetration, but so long as you can hit weak points consistently, then it shreds pretty hard. Some people may think the Penetrator is a better choice due to its overall higher penetration, but the DPS is just way too low, so I say the carbine is the best choice for high skill players. It's certainly my personal favorite, and in case you were wondering, yes, the higher fire rate is very immersive. Shorter rifles tend to have faster fire rates because they have shorter gas systems, and the shorter the gas system, the less distance there is for the operating system to travel, and the less distance there is to travel, the faster it can cycle. But there is more to it than just length. The gas system can be adjusted to allow for more or less gas pressure. The gas system setting affects the cyclic rate the most, so the carbine in particular looks to be running at a very high gas setting. Turning up the gas setting will give it a higher fire rate, but the trade-off is that it produces more recoil. The carbine does have a tiny increase in recoil, but it's so minuscule that I wouldn't be able to tell if I wasn't looking at the numbers. Apparently, the carbine's recoil is over 50% higher than the Liberator. That sounds huge, but the base recoil is so low that any increase is hardly noticeable. If the base recoil was much higher, then the difference in muzzle rise would be much more prominent. In general, the recoil in this game is super low. Most guns shoot completely flat, and you barely have to do any manual input. In reality though, it's pretty tough to control full auto fire, especially if it's an overgas short-barreled rifle. You can't let the gun do all the work for you. You gotta hold the gun firm and find the perfect balance to drive the muzzle down without overcorrecting. It takes a lot of skill, and even then, it's really only viable in close quarters. But if you have a perfectly tuned low-caliber rifle with a long and heavy barrel and a fat muzzle brake, then yeah, with the perfect setup, you can get that laser beam video game style recoil. So for something like the pacifier, the super smooth recoil is very characteristic. But the Liberator Carbine is an overgas short-barreled bullpup with a high fire rate. It's the perfect recipe for getting as much recoil as possible. To be fair, I do often use this gun with a muzzle and a grip to reduce the recoil even further. But even without those attachments, the recoil is really low. This is the future though, so it would be reasonable to assume that all the guns have perfectly tuned muzzle brakes and gas systems with advanced recoil-reducing operating systems. But this is Super Earth we're talking about. Their guns are just metal boxes that shoot bullets. They often lack key ergonomic features that all guns should have. They're so cheap that they can't even give you a simple bolt release or a proper magazine release. So, no, these guns are not more advanced than our current-day firearms. They aren't competition grade by any means. They're barely good enough to qualify as mil-spec. I really doubt these poorly designed guns have optimal recoil mitigation. So if it ain't the guns themselves controlling all the recoil, then I guess your Helldivers doing all the work for you? These guys are elite soldiers after all. Surely, they would be able to handle full auto pretty good. That does make sense from a lore perspective, but in terms of gameplay, having the character do all the work for you is kinda lame. Honestly, I think they should increase the recoil all around. Right now, these guns just feel like toys. There's not much oomph to them. Giving them more recoil would make them feel more powerful, and it would demand a higher skill level to use certain guns. I'm not saying the recoil should be comically high like Rainbow Six Siege though. God no. That game fucking sucks, and it's far from realistic. I think these recoil patterns should be attainable, but it should require the player to do more manual input by dragging their mouse down. That would be far more immersive. I don't think it should be an outright nerf though. To balance it out, a lot of the guns should get huge buffs to their damage and penetration to make them truly powerful. You'll see that some of these guns in particular have comically low recoil, damage, and penetration when compared to their real-life counterparts. But I'll get to those guns later. For now, let's get back to the carbine. So, as is, this gun is a no-recoil laser beam. Once you unlock the carbine, there is literally zero reason to use the regular Liberator. The carbine is simply better. It has a higher DPS for no downsides. I mean, that super tiny increase in recoil may be noticeable when trying to snipe tiny robot heads at long range, but who the hell would use the Liberator or the carbine to snipe tiny robot heads at long range? That role is meant to be filled by the marksman rifles, not assault rifles. So for the typical assault rifle role, yeah, the carbine is a direct upgrade. If you think it has too much recoil, then I hate to tell ya, but that's just a skill issue. Well actually, you may have a totally different experience with recoil, depending on what perspective you play in. The first-person recoil is noticeably reduced when compared to third-person. I don't know if this was intentional, but it definitely needs to be fixed. The recoil should be equal for both perspectives, and the carbine in particular does need a couple adjustments to make it more realistic. A shorter barrel also means less velocity and less effective range. The bullet would leave the barrel with slightly less velocity and energy, and it would lose that velocity a little bit quicker compared to a bullet traveling through a longer length barrel. But again, that's not actually a problem with the carbine. As far as I can tell, the velocity and range drop-off is the same exact as the base model. To balance the carbine properly, they should slightly nerf the velocity and damage at range. They could also slightly increase the recoil, so you can actually feel the difference between the two rifles. I don't really want to nerf the carbine, it is an awesome gun to use, but from an objective standpoint, it's the right thing to do. Otherwise, it's totally unbalanced and overpowered compared to the regular Liberator. Or actually, how about they focus on buffing the default Liberator to bring it up to speed? Remember when I was talking about buffing the penetration for the Liberator and Penetrator? Well, how about we bump up their penetration, but we keep the carbine at light penetration. To justify the light penetration, it would use hollow points that deal more raw damage. That would be quite an interesting dynamic. There would be 3 Liberators, all with differing damage numbers and penetration levels. Each gun would have its own unique feel and use case. That's a lot more interesting than just having the carbine as a direct upgrade. But like I said before, it still wouldn't make sense for a rifle to have the same penetration as a pistol. even if it's using hollow points. So maybe they would have to introduce even more tiers to the penetration system. Perhaps this one should have level 1.5 penetration. I guess you'd call it light-medium penetration. It's better than light, but it's still not quite as good as medium. I can't be mad at the Liberator Carbine for being too good. I guess the real problem then is that the other two Liberators are just underpowered. I do like the Liberator Carbine. It's another Liberator though, so for design and function, it goes in C tier. As for in-game balancing, all they gotta do is slightly reduce the damage at range and increase the recoil. Then, it would be perfect. Right now, I'll give the Carbine 4 stars. It's a fantastic weapon for shredding the enemies of democracy. Next is another variant, the AR-23C Liberator Concussive. I don't have much to say about this one, because I never use it. It's just like the regular Liberator, but it shoots concussive rounds that stun enemies. The trade-off is that the damage and fire rate are much lower than the regular Liberator. The damage is 75, and it chugs along at 400 rounds per minute, so the DPS is absolutely pitiful. It's 500. The regular Liberator has a DPS of 960, so basically, your DPS is cut in half. Even worse, it has higher recoil, and you can't use a muzzle attachment to keep it in check. Out of all the primaries, this one has gotta be the absolute worst. The only thing going for it is that it comes with a drum mag by default, but once you unlock the drum magazine for the other Liberators, this gun has nothing going for it. Sure, the stun rounds confuse and slow down enemies, so I suppose it can be useful, but I would much rather focus on killing enemies dead, rather than slowing them down. If I want to slow them down, I'll just use the EMS mortar. And these concussive rounds don't do a very good job at concussing anyway. It takes way too many shots to stun enemies. So, in literally every scenario, you're much better off using regular bullets. Really, this gun just feels like a lazy reskin to me. All they did was slap on a little canister, which I'm guessing somehow magically infuses the bullets with concussive power. That's gotta be the dumbest contraption ever. Why would they infuse the bullets with a contraption, when they could just make the bullets themselves have concussive power? This is literally the same logic that Fallout guns use. They slap on random doohickeys that magically infuse the bullets with effects. I don't know, man. This gun is lame as hell, and I never use it. I don't think anybody uses it. I'm willing to bet it has the lowest pick rate out of all the primaries. And if there is anyone who uses it unironically, they must be an absolute bot. I don't necessarily mind them reusing the Liberator so much. It does make sense to have a standard issue rifle with multiple variants, but the concussive in particular seems totally useless. It could be deleted entirely, and nothing of value would be lost. It's such a shame, because back in the day, it was called the Liberator Explosive. Sadly, I never got to use it, because I didn't start playing this game until this year. The only reason why I know about it is because a friend told me about the glory days of the Liberator Explosive. Did it actually shoot explosive rounds though? Well, kinda, but not really. It's basically the same concussive rounds it shoots today. The developers just renamed it because it doesn't actually shoot high explosive rounds. It shoots exploding stun rounds. That's a super lame way to fix it though. They should have went all in and made it a high explosive assault rifle. That would be epic. But no, these guys hate fun, so they gave us a lame stun gun instead. For design and function, I'll put the concussive in D tier for having that goofy, bulbous contraption. And in terms of balancing, well, it's gotta be the worst primary in the whole game. Using this thing is the polar opposite of fun. It's pure torture. I would rather pay a visit to the femur breaker than use the concussive on Super Helldive. For being the most miserable weapon in the entire game, I can't give it a single star. The Liberator Concussive gets nothing. It is an insult to democracy. The first pistol we got is the P2 Peacemaker. It's quite a big and bulky handgun. The sheer size of it reminds me of the Mark 23, but this one is even bulkier with that tacky knuckle guard and thick underbarrel. It's a pretty common thing with sci-fi guns. They always tend to have knuckle guards, because, obviously, it looks more sci-fi. Some people say these knuckle guards are necessary so you can use handguns with bulky gloves, but that's just a bunch of baloney. With my Mark 23, I can handle it just fine with a pair of gloves. There is no need for a knuckle guard on a pistol. It's really only something you see on bullpups. I suppose you could put it on a pistol for styling reasons, but this knuckle guard in particular looks way too thick and heavy. It's just adding unnecessary weight. I guess they could keep it, but it really needs to be slimmed down. Well, actually, maybe not. You also have to think about how this would fit into a holster. You would have to get some goofily shaped holster to carry this thing. Sadly, there's not actually any holsters in the game, so we have no clue what this holster would actually look like. In classic video game fashion, the Peacemaker just dangles on your hip with, magnets or something. So either way you look at it, this gun should have a regular trigger guard. They should also slim down the underbarrel portion. It seems like they're trying to do a Mark 23 laser module type of thing, but with the Mark 23 lamb, the whole thing is the lamb. And it's made of polymer, so it's not that heavy. With the Peacemaker though, this huge chunk is just a solid block of metal that isn't doing anything. The actual laser and flashlight module is hanging way down at the bottom, and it's just barely hanging on. They didn't attach it right. Only a small portion of the rail is actually connected. It looks like it could easily fall off if you drop it. They should delete this big chunk off the lower frame to slim it up, and the attachment point for the laser and flashlight should be up here. And of course, they should make sure to attach the whole thing to the rail. They may also want to consider making this gun with a different material. The shiny reflective surface tells me that this whole gun is metal, which would make it super heavy. Not only is this gun big and heavy as is, but the all-metal construction makes it even heavier. It looks like this thing would weigh about 5 or 6 pounds, which is comically obese for a handgun. 3 pounds is already quite a handful, and this one looks to be double that. It's like the Fallout 4 10mm. It's an unwieldy brick. Like I said before, more weight can help reduce recoil, but past a certain point, you get diminishing returns. It's much more effective to use a muzzle attachment to reduce recoil. Again, for comparison, the Mark 23 is a huge handgun, but it's not that heavy. Unloaded, it's about 2.5 pounds, and loaded, it's about 3. So although it's quite large in volume, in terms of weight, it's just slightly above average. That's because it's mostly made of polymer, and polymer is less dense than metal. Some people may have the notion that plastic guns are unreliable, but that's not the case at all. Maybe if it's made with cheap plastic, then sure, it'll probably suck. But if it's made with high quality stuff, then it actually makes the gun extremely reliable. High quality polymer can be super resistant to the elements, much more so than traditional metal and wood. The Mark 23 in particular is insanely reliable. It's perhaps the most reliable handgun ever made. It can go thousands and thousands of rounds before running into a single malfunction, all while being exposed to the harsh environments and not being cleaned. I'm willing to bet you could take this gun to an alien planet with extreme weather, and it would function flawlessly. So for a sci-fi space gun, it makes more sense to make it with polymer. It's more resistant to the elements, and it's lighter. Better yet, they could make it with a polymer and metal fusion. With my 320 Spectre, for example, it has a tungsten-infused polymer frame, so it's both lightweight and extra tough. If you ask me, this is exactly how a futuristic space pistol should be built. Well, I'm talking about the material specifically. They should also make sure it's drop safe. We could assume this gun is made with some futuristic lightweight and super durable metal, but this is Super Earth we're talking about. Chances are, it's made with the cheapest scrap metal they could find. And you know, one good thing about an all-metal handgun is that you can use it as a melee weapon. So yes, the Peacemaker's design could be effective, provided that you use it like a club. It's not like these guys really need their guns to last for thousands of rounds. The average Helldiver only lasts about 2 minutes. Another interesting design feature with the Peacemaker is that it doesn't have a traditional hammer. It doesn't appear to be striker-fired either. On a striker-fired gun, this whole part should move back with the slide, but with the Peacemaker, it doesn't. So that leads me to believe this is a spurless hammer. This specific design is made for concealed carry, so you don't have a hammer that could potentially snag on your clothing. The downside is that it's double action only, so the trigger pull sucks balls. Seeing that flat hammer move is kinda uncanny, but it does have a practical purpose, so I can't hate on it. But does this supposed spurless hammer on the Peacemaker actually move? No, or at least, I can't tell. I slowed it down, and I swear, it is not moving. So, I don't know if it's actually supposed to be a spurless hammer, or if they just, didn't animate it. I'm kinda hoping it's not, because the double action trigger pull would suck ass. And why the hell would they make a full-size surface pistol double action only? That's the worst design possible. It's only acceptable for small concealed carry guns that are meant to be used at point-blank range. I don't know. I'm just gonna assume it's supposed to be a striker-fired gun then. Striker-fired guns work just fine. But personally, I would prefer a traditional single-action hammer because they tend to have better triggers, and that makes them more accurate. I'm speaking in general terms, of course. That's not always the case. A custom-tuned striker trigger can be pretty darn good, but it'll never compete with a top-tier hammer-fired handgun. So in terms of function, you could say this gun is more like the P320. Also like the P320, the Peacemaker doesn't have a manual safety. Technically, you don't really need a manual safety, much like a second kidney or lung. It's optional. For a range toy, it's fine, I suppose. But for a surface gun, one that you have to carry around on your hip all day, you should have some kind of safety so you can safely carry it with one in the chamber. It could be a thumb safety, a grip safety, a trigger safety, or a double action with a decocker. Bottom line is, you gotta have something to keep it from discharging on its own. And yet, the civilian P320 doesn't have an external safety, hence why it's not 100% drop safe. It does have internal safeties, which should work under normal circumstances, but thanks to SIG's glorious quality control, that's not always the case. So that's why the military M17 and M18 have an external safety. It ensures the gun will never go off without a trigger pull. It's a must-have feature for a duty gun. There was a big news story that claimed the M18 randomly discharged and killed an airman, but turns out that was a cover-up. Some doofus was simply playing around with his gun and shot his teammate by accident. He used the ongoing drop-safe P320 controversy to cover his ass, but he later admitted to lying about it. Then he mysteriously wound up dead shortly after. It looks like the Ministry of Truth got to him for slandering the reputation of the SIG M18. So don't worry guys, the military has assured us that the M18 is 100% drop safe. Anyone who says otherwise is a traitor to democracy. But anyway, let's get back to the Peacemaker. Seeing as Super Earth makes subpar guns, and the Peacemaker doesn't have a safety, it would be really funny if the devs gave it a random chance to discharge on you when you equip it. Either that, or it could discharge when you get ragdolled. They already got a bunch of other guns that lack safety regulations and can kill you, so they might as well add the Peacemaker to the list. I don't think it should insta-kill you, but it would give you a mean leg injury and heavy bleeding. Now that would make for quite an immersive addition. It would be even more immersive if the accidental discharging was written off as an intentional feature. You see, the Peacemaker is actually a smart gun. It goes off by itself to alert you of nearby enemies. I do think they should add a slide release though. This gun is missing that part too. Pretty much every handgun has this feature to speed up reloads. So when the slide is locked back, you insert a new mag and simply swipe the slide release to send it home. There are some guns that don't have a slide release, such as the PPK, but that's because it's a pocket pistol. Its goal is to be sleek. In this case, you don't want a slide release potentially snagging on something as you take it out. The slide still locks back on an empty mag, but since there's no slide release, you gotta rack the slide to send it home. For a full-size handgun that's designed to be carried in a holster, yeah, they all have slide releases. I don't think there's a single full-size handgun without it. Sure, the Peacemaker does work without it. You can always rack the slide, so it's not a catastrophic failure. It's just kinda weird that this humongous surface handgun doesn't have a slide release, or a manual safety. So let's make sure to add those parts to our Peacemaker Mark II. And you know what? I changed my mind about the other part. Let's give it a traditional hammer, instead of making it striker fired. So now it'll have a crisp single action trigger, which will enable you to spam it like a pro shooter. Hey, this thing is coming along pretty good. Funnily enough, the only part we don't have to change is the magazine release. It has a proper button release on the side, which is highly ergonomic. It's much better than the paddle release on the Mark 23 in my opinion, so there's no need to touch that. We'll keep it as is. Another weird part I noticed is this cut in the slide. It reminds me of the Beretta M9. You see, the M9 doesn't have a normal slide that fully envelops the barrel. Half of it is gone, and the barrel is exposed. Apparently, the purpose of this design is to give the round more clearance to eject, which reduces the chance to jam. If there's no slide, then there's less chance of the casing getting stuck in the slide. Another small advantage is that it slightly reduces weight, and it allows the barrel to cool off quicker. But at the same time, that means the hot barrel is exposed, so you gotta make sure to never grab the front end after shooting a bunch of rounds, or else you'll burn your hand. If you're used to racking regular pistols, then that could be an issue. I would know, because my dumbass did that the very first time I shot a Beretta. I knew I was shooting a Beretta, and yet I tried to rack it from the front end due to muscle memory. Never again. So please, don't grab a Beretta from the front. Rack it by pinching the rear. And hey, that's exactly what your Helldiver does with the Peacemaker. That's flawless technique. Personally, I would prefer a pistol with a full slide though. I like having that extra real estate so I can rack the gun with more force. Plus it gives you more ways to manipulate the slide. I wouldn't say this slide design is inherently bad though, it's just different. It comes down to personal preference. One thing's for sure, it does look cool, so I say the Peacemaker can keep its circumcised slide. Or wait a second, is this actually supposed to be the exposed barrel? If you look closely, I think it moves with the rest of the slide when shooting. That implies that this is not the exposed barrel. It's just a small indentation on the slide. I'm not sure if that's intentional, or if it's just not properly animated. Either way, it already looks the part, so they might as well go all in and give it an exposed barrel. They should also give it some attachment options. Right now, there is no customization for sidearms. You can't change out the sights or underbarrel attachments, nor are there any options for magazines or muzzle devices. You're stuck with what you got. So thank goodness the iron sights on the Peacemaker are solid. It's pretty easy to aim with them. At the same time, it would be nice to have the option for a red dot. Red dots are the future after all, so while we're at it, we might as well add an optic cut for the Peacemaker Mark II. But having no muzzle attachments especially is kinda lame. It would be super awesome to slap on a suppressor and use it as a stealth weapon. But all we got is this big threat protector that doesn't have any functionality. It's not even attached to the muzzle. It looks like they glued it onto the slide. The actual barrel is way smaller. It's hidden inside there. Perhaps they should shrink the threat protector so it actually fits onto the threads. Otherwise, it's not protecting anything. It's just a useless decoration. This thing is so big, it made me think this gun was shooting a 50 caliber round, but no. Apparently, it shoots 9mm, 9x20 to be specific. So basically, it's just like 9mm Luger, just 1mm longer. Despite that, this gun has high recoil and higher damage than the Liberator. It's super snappy with lots of muzzle flip, but for a gun this big and heavy, it should shoot flat like a laser beam. It's kind of funny how they designed a comically oversized handgun, chambered in 9mm, but it recoils like a compact 45. The damage shouldn't be this high either. It deals 100 damage, which is 10 points higher than the Liberator. If it was shooting a high caliber pistol round, then yeah, that would make sense. But 9mm is not going to be more damaging than an intermediate rifle round. So either they gotta nerf the damage, or rechamber it to use a bigger bullet. I vote that they keep the damage the same, and rechamber it for a bigger round. They could make it use a futuristic version of 45 or 10mm. That would line up much better with the magazine capacity too. It's got a 15 round magazine, which seems like way too little for how big it is. For comparison, a 9mm Glock 19 can hold 15 rounds, and this is a compact handgun. Meanwhile, a full-size 9mm can hold around 20, so if this gun was using 45 or 10mm, then yeah, the 15 round capacity would make sense. When it comes to gameplay, I do like how the Peacemaker plays. It feels really good to shoot, and I especially like how responsive it is. A lot of games put an artificial fire rate cap on semi-automatic firearms, so they feel super sluggish and clunky. But with the Peacemaker, you can spam the trigger like a pro competition shooter. I think the cap might be too high though. It's capped at 900. So if you spam it hard enough, you can fire it like a machine gun at 900 rounds per minute. It's kinda hard to do it with normal clicking, but if you rebind the firing key to the mouse wheel, then yeah, this pistol basically turns into a Glock with a switch. If you aren't careful, the Space TF might raid your Super Destroyer and confiscate your trigger finger for being an unregistered machine gun. But that means the potential DPS of this gun is 1500, which makes the starter pistol one of the most powerful guns in the entire game. Well, that's not entirely the case. It lacks penetration power, and the magazine capacity is very low compared to the primaries. But the fact that the raw fire rate in DPS is this high is absolutely ridiculous. They should probably lower the cap to around 500 rounds per minute to make it more realistic. Even for the best shooters out there, that's about as fast as you can fire a semi-automatic firearm. But that high DPS means this sidearm ain't half bad. Like I said, it is lacking quite a bit in capacity, so you can't really use it to clear out hordes. But for cleaning up stragglers, oh yeah, it works good. This is a sidearm after all. It's best used in emergencies for when you run out of ammo with your primary. Remember kids, switching to your sidearm is faster than reloading. So when you dump your whole magazine into a horde of bugs, but there's still a couple left, you can quickly swap to the Peacemaker to make peace with them. I do like how the Peacemaker performs, but its design is riddled with all kinds of flaws. You could excuse its shitty design with lore reasons, but at the same time, it's not that costly to make a decent gun. Glocks, for example, are very cheap, but they're great handguns and have solid ergonomics. Shoot, even a High Point is more functional than the Peacemaker, and that's as cheap as you can get. So if the Peacemaker existed in real life, it would suck. Big time. For function and design, I'm gonna have to put the Peacemaker in D tier. That may be considered treason, but I must be objective. At the very least, it is better than the Fallout 4 10mm. For performance and in-game balancing though, I think I'll give it 3.5 stars. It's a decent tool for pistol whipping dissenters. If we're rating my epically redesigned Peacemaker Mark II though, then oh yeah, it's the best sci-fi pistol design ever made. No doubt about it, it's going in the S tier. When you look at the difference between the two, it really shows you just how poorly designed the regular Peacemaker truly is. It's comically bulky and missing key ergonomic features. Overall, it's just not very functional or practical. I guess it would work, but it wouldn't work very good. They don't have to totally delete this pistol and start from scratch. They can keep the overall concept and aesthetic, but it sure does need a huge overhaul to make it a good design. Another sidearm is the P19 Redeemer, which is a boxy and bulky machine pistol. So basically, it's like a futuristic MAC-10. Well, the overall shape and silhouette may look like a MAC-10, but functionally, it's more like a Desert Eagle. You see, the MAC-10 is an open-bolt, straight blowback design. It's a pretty common design for SMGs and machine pistols because of its simplicity and reliability. But the Redeemer doesn't function like a typical machine pistol. Instead, it fires from a closed bolt, and it has a half of a slide. It's much like the Desert Eagle. So the whole thing doesn't reciprocate, just the rear end. It even has a safety much like the Desert Eagle. And what's especially weird about this safety is that it bugs the fuck out when shooting. It doesn't move with the rest of the gun. When you fire your first shot, it scoots forward, and it stays out of place until you reload. Only then does it reset and go back to its normal spot. But when you shoot again, it bugs out again. Another important feature with the Desert Eagle is that it's gas-operated, which isn't very common with pistols. You really only see it with high-caliber hand cannons. The gas operation is necessary for cycling those powerful rounds properly. When it comes to low-caliber 9mm though, it's just not necessary. You don't need that much force to cycle these smaller rounds. Pretty much all these pistols are either recoil or blowback operated. So is the Redeemer gas-operated like the Desert Eagle? Well, I can't disassemble it to make sure, but I'm just gonna assume it's straight blowback. This gun shoots 9x20mm, so yeah, it's a low-caliber pistol round. It's kinda rare, but there are other handguns that have this half-slide design, like the Silencer Co. Maxim 9. It's a well-designed gun. The half-slide means there's less reciprocating mass, and it's fitted with an integral suppressor that makes it front-heavy. All that greatly reduces the muzzle flip, and of course, the suppressor also reduces the sound signature. Even cooler, it's capable of full auto fire. So with that fat suppressor on the front end, it's very controllable for a machine pistol. The Maxim 9 is the perfect blueprint for a sci-fi machine pistol. The Redeemer though, well, this design works, but it's not very optimal. Just like the Peacemaker, the Redeemer is missing a slide release, so you always have to rack the slide to chamber the first round. But it's not like adding a slide release would do anything, because it lacks a slide stop in the first place. The Redeemer doesn't lock open after firing the last round, which is very atypical for a pistol. I honestly can't think of any examples that do that. It is somewhat common with rifles, especially older designs like the AK. They don't lock open when empty. So it's not like this is a catastrophic design failure. It's just kinda silly how these futuristic guns are lacking basic features that all modern pistols have. At the very least, the Redeemer has a safety, so that does give it a point over the Peacemaker. I like the overall look of the Redeemer, but man, just like the previous guns, it is comically obese. It's very similar to the MAC-10 in that way, so it is realistic in that sense. But the MAC-10 isn't really the best blueprint for a futuristic gun. It's just a box of metal that shoots bullets. The ergonomics are terrible. Normally, a heavier gun means you get less recoil, but not in this case. It's super top heavy and poorly balanced, so it rocks like a boat when firing. Funnily enough, this heavy-ass gun has higher recoil than other guns that are half the weight. That would most certainly be the case with the Redeemer as well. But in actual gameplay, the recoil ain't that bad. It's surprisingly easy to control. That's a common trend with the whole game though. All of the guns tend to have low recoil, even when they shouldn't. But if you compare the Redeemer to everything else, then relatively speaking, the muzzle rise is higher than most. Even if they don't want to overhaul recoil for the entire game, I do think they should change the animation for the Redeemer specifically. The gun itself recoils straight back, but for a high bore axis top-heavy design like this, it should rock up and down a lot more. Especially since this gun doesn't have a stock. It would bounce all over the place. So I vote that they give this gun a foldable stock to make it more realistic. I'm really hoping the developers add customization for the sidearms. It would be super awesome to level them up and kit them out with attachments. With the Redeemer, for example, you should be able to add a stock, an extended mag, a vertical grip, and a suppressor. So when it's fully upgraded, it would be one hell of a sidearm. It would basically be like a primary SMG at that point. At the very least, they are kind enough to give you a red dot instead of shitty irons, so it's pretty easy to aim with. The MAC-10 iron sights in particular are absolutely horrendous. You can't see what the hell you're shooting. As is, the Redeemer is still a solid sidearm. It deals 70 damage per shot and has a fire rate of 1100. Its raw DPS is pretty high. It's 1283, which is higher than most primaries. I really appreciate that. A lot of games tend to nerf fast-firing machine guns to make them, balanced. But it doesn't make them balanced at all. It just makes them shitty and useless. Thankfully, that ain't the case with the Redeemer. It's pretty dang effective, but it does have some downsides to balance it out. It lacks range, has relatively high recoil, and it's limited by its magazine capacity. With other guns, you can get big 60-round drums, but the Redeemer is stuck with a 31-rounder, and that's such an oddly specific magazine capacity. Why would it be 31 instead of 30? The 45 caliber Mag-10 has a 30-round magazine, but the 9mm version holds 32, so I think they should change the Redeemer to hold 32. It's such a tiny detail, I know, and I bet most players never even knew or cared that it has a 31-round capacity. But man, it low-key bugs the hell out of me. And now that I've revealed it to the world, may it forever bug you guys as well. The Redeemer is a good sidearm for clearing out groups of small bugs or voteless, but that's about it. Again, it's a sidearm, so it's best used in emergencies for when you run out of ammunition in your primary. I think the balancing is spot on. It's got good damage potential, but the downsides keep it in check. I wouldn't change anything about the Redeemer in that aspect, or maybe I would. For a 9mm, the balancing is spot on, but I think it would be more appropriate for this gun to use a bigger cartridge. That would be a lot more fun in terms of gameplay too. It would increase the damage and make it into a DPS monster, but that would also mean much higher recoil. So, you would have to be highly skilled to make use of it. I'm also thinking about how this would play out in the future. If they introduce another machine pistol based on the Maxim 9, that one would be the low recoil, low damage 9mm machine pistol, while the Redeemer would be the unwieldy high caliber shredder. Overall, the Redeemer is okay. It seems functional, but much like the Peacemaker, the ergonomics are atrocious, and this thing would handle like a brick. At this point, it seems like these guys don't really care about making high-quality guns. They're just giving their soldiers cheap guns that are shitty, but still functional enough to kill bugs. I don't know how to edit this design and make it better without completely starting over. It's built like a Mag-10, and you can't really optimize the Mag-10. It's just not a good starting point. I wouldn't replace this one though. I'll keep the Redeemer as is, cause it's a starter gun, and it's intentionally bad. But for a future war bond, I would like to see a machine pistol inspired by the Maxim 9. That would be a truly awesome and effective space-age machine pistol. For function and design, I say the Redeemer belongs in C tier. It's another case where the gun is functional, but it ain't optimized in the slightest. Funnily enough, I think it's slightly better and has less problems than the Peacemaker. The balancing is pretty darn good, and very realistic. Assuming they don't introduce another 9mm machine pistol, then sure, they can keep this one as is. The only thing they need to change is the recoil animation. So for in-game performance, I'll give the Redeemer 4.5 stars. It's the perfect tool for slicing through oversized cockroaches. Next is the SMG-37 Defender. Yet again, it's a very boxy and bulky design. It's so blocky, I thought this shit was a Minecraft gun mod at first. I'm starting to see a common theme here. All these starter guns are comically bulky and have terrible ergonomics, but the stuff you unlock through the war bonds tend to have better designs. That's actually pretty darn immersive. The starter guns kinda suck. They're made for grunts that feed the meat grinder. But if you prove yourself to be a loyal, democracy-loving soldier, you can unlock guns that have genuinely good designs. But still, guns like the Defender don't have to be this bulky. It just seems like wasted materials to me. Besides it being built like a brick, it's kinda like a Sten. It's an open-bolt submachine gun with a side-fed magazine. I think they ought to make it more like a Sten. It's a slim and simple tube-like design that doesn't take up too much space. It's very cost-effective. Or maybe they shouldn't make it like the Sten. It's kind of funny to see a futuristic SMG with a side-fed magazine. This design was fairly common with SMGs from World War I and World War II. It allows the user to easily fire from the prone position, without having the magazine get in the way. So for trench warfare, yeah, it serves a purpose. But nowadays, it's not really something you see on modern SMGs. Nowadays, SMGs are used for close quarters room clearing, not trench warfare. These side-fed magazines aren't very ergonomic for that role. They give the gun a weird balance, and it can get in the way while maneuvering in tight spaces, so that's why they're not used anymore. A traditional magazine placement is simply better. But in Helldivers, they regress back to using this design for some reason. Yeah, you can shoot this gun prone if you really want, but it's not an ideal strategy. In Helldivers, you don't have time to sit on your ass while all the hordes are chasing after you. You always have to be on the move, and you'll find yourself in close quarters urban environments too. So this mag design is not suited for a Helldiver at all. It seems they didn't really think about it too hard. They just gave it this side-fed magazine to make it look unique and cool. And yeah, it is unique. Is it cool though? Well, that's a bit more subjective. To me, I think it's kinda weird and not very optimal, but at the very least, it still works. Well, actually, it doesn't work, because there's no magazine release whatsoever. You just rip that shit out with brute force. With the Sten gun, the mag release is right on top of the magwell. You can easily tap it as you take out the magazine. The Defender doesn't have a magwell though, and I tried looking all over the place, but there is no discernible mag release to be found. I guess they could keep the side-fed mag if they really want to, but they should definitely make sure to give it a magwell and a proper magazine release. What makes it even more interesting is that it's a quad-stack magazine. It widens out to allow for a higher capacity. So this fat magazine holds a whopping 45 rounds. 45 rounds of 12mm. So wait a minute, there is no way this magazine holds 45 rounds. If it was 9mm, then yeah, it does look like a 45 round quad stack. But 12mm is way fatter, so there is no chance it would fit. This magazine would have to be a double stack then, so it would fit like 20 rounds at most. What's even weirder is the extended magazine. It doesn't make the magazine longer, rather it switches it to a helical magazine, much like the magazine on the PP-19 Bison. It's a genius design that feeds rounds in a spiral, rather than a straight line. That allows the magazine to be relatively compact, while having a huge capacity. This one holds a whopping 75 rounds. That would be believable for a smaller caliber, but for 12mm, it would be half that. To see a side-mounted helical mag is pretty darn weird, but it's not a bad idea. It's better than having a long-ass mag that sticks out so far that you can't fit through a doorway. Still though, this heavy magazine would throw off the balance of the weapon and make it really awkward to handle. Ultimately, this gun would be better with a traditional magazine placement. And holy moly, that is quite a big round for a submachine gun. 12.7mm translates to 50 cal. This one is just shy of that. It's a 12mm, so it's a 47 caliber. If 9mm kills the body and 45 kills the soul, then 47 ought to blow their shit smooth off and send them to the shadow realm. But no, the recoil is pretty smooth. It doesn't feel powerful at all, and the damage is just slightly above average. It's 100, which may sound like a big number, but in Helldivers, it ain't that crazy. The Liberator does 90, and this one is just 10 points higher. Don't get me wrong, 100 damage is good, but this hulking 12mm should be dealing a lot more. It's not quite as long as 50 Action Express, so I'm not saying it should deal 200 or something crazy. It specifically says the cartridge is 12 by 25. It's the same length as a 10mm, but it's 2mm wider. It's heavier too. This bullet is 230 grains, which is the same weight as a 45 ACP. So basically, you can think of this round as a 45 on steroids, or maybe it's more like a beefier version of 10mm. Either way, I'd say the damage should be around 130. Turns out, there is another 12mm SMG in the game, the Reprimand, and it does 135 damage. That seems fair and balanced to me, so at the very least, the Defender should have the same damage. I don't see why they artificially nerfed it. Probably because it's a starter gun, but still, the damage shouldn't be this low. It doesn't help that the fire rate is so slow either. It chugs along at 520 rounds per minute. That gives it a DPS of 866. That's not terrible, but it's not competitive with the other SMGs. It's even worse when you consider that it only has light penetration. But the 12mm Reprimand has medium penetration. So again, this gun shoots the same bullet, but it does way less damage and has less penetration for no reason. As a result, this gun is only usable for killing unarmored enemies on low difficulty missions. Well actually, this gun is so trash that I couldn't even beat a level 2 Illuminate mission. I know everyone's gonna say that's a skill issue, but I can beat level 10 missions without dying when I'm using a gun that actually kills things. I will not be accepting any criticism on this matter. This gun is simply turbo trash. To be fair, this footage was taken before the big balancing patch. The Defender used to do 80 damage per shot with a DPS of 693. So at that point in time, it was absolutely terrible. Now, it seems to be a decent weapon, but I think they should buff it even more. And yep, they sure did. Now I'm having to edit this segment for a second time, because Arrowhead released another patch and buffed the Defender. Again. That's how bad the Defender was. They had to buff it twice in the span of 30 days. Now, it does 110 damage per shot, and the DPS is 953. That's great, but it's still not on par with the Reprimand, which now deals 140 damage. They have two ways to fix it. Either they increase the damage, recoil, and penetration while lowering the capacity to match the Reprimand, or they can keep the magazine capacity, rechamber it for a lower caliber round, and give it a higher fire rate. I vote for the latter. I think it should be a medium caliber SMG with a moderate fire rate. We've already got a high caliber slow firing SMG and a low caliber fast firing SMG, so the Defender should be the happy medium between the two. Here's my proposal. They can keep the damage at 100, but chamber it for a smaller round, like 10mm, then increase the fire rate to 750. That would give it a DPS of 1250, which is quite a few points above the Liberator. I don't necessarily want it to be outright better than the Liberator though. The Liberator should have medium penetration, while the Defender has light penetration, so that would be the trade-off. That's not actually the case, but I already discussed how the whole penetration system needs a rework, so you know what I mean. Another downside is that the SMGs have less effective range. Pistol rounds are much slower than rifle rounds. They drop quicker, and they lose their energy and damage quicker. That reality is represented in Helldivers too. These projectiles aren't hit scan, they have velocity and weight, so at longer ranges, you'll have to compensate for bullet drop. There's also damage drop-off, which is dictated by the hidden drag mechanic. Basically, the higher the drag, the less damage the gun deals at range. All the rifles have a low drag factor, while the pistols and SMGs have a high drag factor. That's pretty darn immersive, because yeah, bullets do lose velocity and energy at range, which means they'll hit with less power and deal less damage. The Liberator, for example, will lose 13% of its damage at 100 meters. That's pretty close to the ballistics of 5.56. They could bring it down to 10% to make it dead-on accurate, but that's such a small change in damage, so I can't say it really matters. With the pistol calibers though, holy shit, they're way off. In the most recent balancing update, they overhauled the drag system and heavily nerfed all the pistol calibers. Now, their drag factor is turbo high. With the Defender, for example, it loses 65% of its damage at 100 meters, so that means it's only dealing 35 damage at that range. At close range, a small bot with 100 HP is a one-shot kill, but at long range, it's 3 shots. In reality, a pistol round would only lose about 30% of its energy at 100 meters. That can vary depending on the round and the barrel length, but for the most part, pistol rounds don't lose more than half their damage at 100 meters. It would take about 200 meters for the energy to drop that much. As a double whammy, Arrowhead nerfed the sway on the SMGs and pistols too. They bob around on your screen a lot more, and that makes them even more worthless for medium range. I don't get why they did that for the SMGs and pistols. They're lightweight and easy to handle. The lighter the gun, the easier it is to keep it stabilized. A gun should only have high sway if it's really heavy, so this high sway would only apply to the big machine guns and heavy snipers. Well, to be fair, the Defender is comically obese for a submachine gun, so I guess this one would have high sway, but if it were appropriately sized for an SMG, then yeah, the sway would almost be non-existent. It's quite ironic, because the Dragon Sway was perfectly fine until Arrowhead decided to fuck them up for no reason. These blockheads decided to nerf these guns when they were perfectly fine and balanced. By all means, SMGs and pistols should have less effective range than assault rifles, but the damage drop-off wouldn't be this bad. Arrowhead needs to go back and revert the changes they made to the Dragon Sway. It was far more immersive before the big balancing update. Besides that, a cool advantage with the SMGs and pistols is that you can hold them with one hand. It comes in handy when you're running away from hordes. You can run in the opposite direction while spraying behind you with one hand. You can also carry something in your left hand, like a mission-related item, while using a pistol or SMG in your right hand. But the best way to use these guns one-handed is to pair them with a shield. You'll basically become unstoppable in head-on fights. The shield blocks all small arms fire, all the while you're able to direct fire back at the enemy. It's especially effective if you coordinate with teammates and stack more shields on top of it. At that point, you become the ultimate defender, an immovable object that takes no damage, unless it's a fucking cannon turret or something. In that case, the shield will explode, and you'll get ragdolled. But hey, I would much rather have the shield take the blow for me. Really, the only downside to using a shield is that you can't aim down sights. But that makes perfect sense, because, you know, you're holding a shield in the other hand. A lot of other games will make it to where you can use a shield, but you're either prevented from using a sidearm entirely, or the sidearm is so inaccurate that it's basically worthless. But in Helldivers, the guns are still pretty darn accurate while using the shield. Simply aim in the middle of your screen and use the tracer rounds to guide your way. I was sleeping on the shields for the longest time. I figured they would nerf your accuracy super hard, but thankfully, that ain't the case. The ballistic shield is low-key goated. As for the Defender, it's okay. It seems functional, but much like the other guns, it's far from optimal. The main thing is that it needs to be slimmed down, and ideally, it should have a traditional magazine. If it were up to me, I would start over and make this SMG look more like the B&T KH9. It's got that boxy, retro-futuristic sci-fi look to it, but obviously, it's much slimmer and has good ergonomics. Coincidentally, it has the option to use side-fed magazines, and helical mags too, so it's just like the Defender, but it's better in every aspect. So yeah, let's go with that. The KH9 is a perfect fit for Helldivers 2. Well, I'm not saying they should copy and paste it. They should slightly alter the design to fit the art style. Now this is what the Defender should look like. When you compare the two, it becomes obvious just how goofy the Defender looks. The Defender Mark II, though, is absolutely peak. I would totally put this gun in S tier. For the regular old Defender though, the design does seem functional, but it's far from optimal. The worst part about it is that it's extremely ugly. So when it comes to the design, I'm actually going to put the Defender in D tier. The in-game balancing isn't that bad though. Well, if this was the old Defender, it would get like 1 star max. But they did buff it quite a bit, so now the Defender is actually usable. Still though, I think it's balanced the wrong way. So for performance, I say the Defender deserves 2.5 stars. It's a decent tool for shooting things, I guess. Next is the SMG-72 Pummeler, which is a variant of the Defender. It comes with a vertical grip, a laser light combo, a big knuckle guard, and a collapsible stock instead of a folding stock. I like the collapsible stock, but the knuckle guard is kinda tacky. I think the worst part is the placement of the vertical grip. It's super far down and close to the knuckle guard. That seems like it would make your grip really awkward and cramped. Not only that, but this grip placement would negatively affect your recoil control. The further away your hand is from the barrel, the less you can control it. It's better to have your grip high and up front, so you can manhandle the muzzle rise. They should put this grip in the regular spot, but of course, that slot is taken up by the laser light combo. They should move that to the top rail, or give it a side rail, and put it there. Besides the attachments, the big thing that sets the Pummeler apart is that it shoots stun rounds. So, it's just like the Liberator Concussive. It has lower damage, a slower fire rate, and higher recoil, probably because they placed the grip in such a horrible spot. Sheesh, they made this gun worse in every single aspect. I guess the stun effect can be useful for slowing down enemies, but I think it's more effective to simply shoot them dead with higher damaging bullets. At the very least, the DPS is higher than the Liberator Concussive, so it's not quite as bad, but I still don't recommend it. Trying to use this gun on high-level missions is a serious handicap. One thing I do appreciate is that they didn't give this one a goofy contraption that magically infuses the bullets with concussive power. It seems like the bullets themselves are concussive. So you know what? This gun is slightly better than the Liberator Concussive, both in terms of design and performance. But even after the most recent balance patch, the performance is still abysmal. I don't recommend using it. For design and function, the Pummeler belongs in D tier. As for in-game balancing, it's hot space trash. But I'll be nice and give it half a star for being ever so slightly better than the Concussive. It is a disgrace to democracy. Let's look at the DMRs now. This one is called the R63 Diligence. This design looks to be mostly inspired by the Scar H. The overall shape and function is fairly similar. I do kinda like the design here, but as you can guess, I think it's a little bit too bulky for no reason. The magwell especially is way too big, and this rubbery looking grip on the handguard should be deleted entirely. It just looks like some random piece they tacked on there. It would look much cleaner without it. Ideally, they should slim up the handguard even more and give it an M-LOK style mounting system. Picatinny rails are so 2008. M-LOK rails are taken over, so in the future, it's very likely it'll be the standard, unless they come up with something else. Don't get me wrong, Picatinny rails are awesome, they're quite a vibe, and they are plenty functional, but from a practicality perspective, M-LOK is simply better. Pic rails add weight, cause it adds on more physical material, but M-LOK rails aren't actually a real physical thing, they're holes. So obviously, punching holes in the handguard makes it lighter. It's a very minor difference. We're only talking about a few ounces here, but ounces start to feel like pounds when you have to carry around a big-ass rifle all day. Using negative space for the mounting system means the handguard itself can be thinner, and that means you can get a more aggressive grip, which enables you to control the recoil better. So, all around, M-LOK is just better. That, and it looks pretty darn futuristic too. It's a perfect fit for a sci-fi space game, and yet, I don't think there's a single gun in Helldivers that uses M-LOK style rails. It seems like all of them use old school Picatinny rails, which is kinda silly, because this is supposed to be the future, not the past. Well actually, I think this is all very intentional. Helldivers doesn't seem to be going for a contemporary interpretation of the future. It looks like they're aiming for a 1990s and early 2000s retro futuristic aesthetic. So when you take that into consideration, yeah, the abundance of Picatinny rails does make sense. Way back then, they thought this stuff was the future. And man, it really hurts to say that stuff from the 2000s is now considered retro. We have officially reached Unk status, my boys. It's Jover. Anyway, back to the Diligence itself. A neat detail I noticed is that it has a working dust cover. When you first drop in, the dust cover is folded up, but after you take your first shot, it flips down. It's the same case with the Liberator too. It's such a tiny detail that nobody would ever really notice in normal gameplay, but I think it's really cool when developers add stuff like this. It's so immersive. What's also immersive is that the Diligence has a usable magazine release, unlike the Liberator. This one has a paddle, just behind the magwell. On an empty reload, your character hits it with their left thumb as they take out the magazine. Wow, that's perfect technique. But on a partial reload, they poke the paddle with their right middle finger and flip out the magazine like they're doing a tactical AR-15 reload. That's a very odd way to reload a gun with a paddle magazine release. I've never seen any human on this planet reload a gun this way. So I tried doing it myself to see if it actually works. And for the most part, it doesn't work that good. The first problem is that the paddle is too far away to be reached while still holding onto the pistol grip. You have to break your grip, or take your hand off the grip entirely to reach the paddle with your right finger. You also have to make sure to fully actuate the paddle. It requires a firm push, not a light tap. And you really gotta stretch your fingers out to fully actuate it. Even if you manage to fully actuate the paddle, the magazine won't come out by itself. You'll still have to drag the magazine out by hand, or shake the gun around. I tried this technique with multiple guns, and for most of them, it's extremely awkward, uncomfortable, slow, and inconsistent. But there is one gun I could do it with, the Ruger Mini 14. The paddle on this one isn't so stiff, but even in this case, the magazine won't simply fall out by itself. I have to flick the gun sideways to drop it. And hey, that's exactly what your Helldiver does with the Diligence. So I guess this reload is immersive after all. But if you look very closely, it doesn't look like your Helldiver is fully actuating the paddle. They keep their hand on the grip, which means they aren't able to reach the paddle and fully push it forward. All they do is a light booger flick, which wouldn't be nearly enough to release the magazine. And I swear, if you really zoom in, it looks like no contact is made at all. They're just a hair short. So, no actually. This reload animation doesn't work because your Helldiver isn't breaking their grip to fully actuate the paddle. This is highly unimmersive. Literally unplayable. I refuse to use the Diligence because of this broken reload animation. But assuming the animation was done right, then yes, this reload technique could work. But even then, I don't see why you would reload it this way. Doing it the normal way is much easier and more consistent. To be as fair as possible, this technique does look cool and flashy, and I wouldn't mind it too much if it was done for an empty reload. But they're doing it for a partial reload. Why would you dump the entire magazine on the ground when there's still plenty of fresh bullets in there? It's a much better idea to take the magazine out by hand, so you can save it for later. So if they want to keep this animation, they should apply it to the empty reload only, and put the other animation on the partial reload. That would make a lot more sense. But I guess it doesn't really matter, because your Helldiver doesn't save their magazines anyway. They always dump them on the ground, even if you only shot one bullet. There's another big issue that needs fixing: the charging handle. Just like the Liberator, it's up front and on the right side, so it's extremely awkward to operate. At least with the Liberator, it's a bullpup, so the overall length of pull isn't that long. That means you can rack the charging handle while shouldering the gun. But with the Diligence, you can't do that. It's a conventional rifle with a long length of pull, so the charging handle is out of reach when shouldered. If I try to recreate this movement by using my PTR left-handed, then yeah, it's just not possible. To make it work, your character has to rack it underhanded like an AK. That does work, but it's not very convenient. Doing an underhanded AK reload for an AK is perfectly fine, but for a Scar H or AR-10 style sniper, it just looks really goofy. And again, just like the Liberator, the charging handle is reciprocating, so if you're not careful with your grip, you may break a couple fingers. Modern guns are shifting toward having left-handed, non-reciprocating charging handles because they're more ergonomic. But just about every single gun in Helldivers 2 has a right-sided reciprocating charging handle. It's such an odd phenomenon. I wouldn't mind it if it were just a couple guns, but the fact that the vast majority are like this is very odd. I don't see why these guys would prefer having worse ergonomics. If I had to guess, the developers probably did this very deliberately so you can see the coolness of the animations in third person. But I don't think that's a very good reason. To me, it just feels painful watching my character awkwardly reloading such a poorly designed gun. You can shoot in first person, by the way, so if they really want to show off the animations, then they should save it for first person. They also need to fix the balancing, because this gun is absolute balls. Firstly, the fire rate is way too slow. It's kept at 350 rounds per minute. That makes this gun hella clunky and unresponsive. It can't keep up with your trigger finger. The other semi-autos have a really high fire rate cap. You can shoot them as fast as you can pull the trigger, but that's not the case with the Diligence. They should raise the fire rate cap to around 500, maybe 400 at the very least. I don't know why they nerfed this one specifically, probably for balancing reasons. But that doesn't line up, because this gun just sucks all around. It does 165 damage per shot, and has a DPS of 962, which puts it on par with the Liberator. So, on paper, it may seem like it's balanced, but in practice, this gun feels much worse. If we use the Liberator as a baseline, it's chambered in 5mm and does 90 damage per shot. The Diligence does 85% more damage, which may seem good, but it's not proportionate to the round that it shoots. If we assume it's similar to a 308, then it should be doing a lot more damage. It's always kinda hard to quantify the damage of a bullet, but if I had to put a number on it, I would say 308 is about 2.5 times more powerful than 5.56. The Liberator deals 90 damage, so multiply that by 2.5 and you get 225. That's how much damage the Diligence should be doing. Even if we round down for balancing reasons, 200 should be the barest of all bare minimums. They should at least give it medium penetration. The fact that they gave this full-size rifle round the same penetration as a pistol is absolutely baffling. I think the overall aesthetic of the Diligence is fine. If they simply slimmed it down and swapped the charging handle, then it would be nearly perfect. And of course, they really need to fix the balancing. Right now, it's absolutely pitiful. It feels like the work of a Bethesda employee. The design is mostly okay. In that aspect, I say the Diligence belongs in B tier. The balancing and performance, though, is atrocious and highly unimmersive. So for that, the Diligence gets a 1-star performance rating. This gun is an insult to democracy. Next is the Counter Sniper, which is a higher caliber variant of the Diligence. It has a lower magazine capacity, higher recoil, higher damage, and better penetration, but it's heavier and more sluggish to handle. That's another thing I should mention. This game has an ergonomics rating for all the guns. Basically, the lighter the gun, the faster it handles. The heavier the gun, the more sluggish it is. Even if you set your sensitivity to the max, it doesn't matter. Your character can only swing that gun so fast. It's pretty darn immersive, because yeah, humans can't do 360 spins at 100 miles per hour like in Call of Duty. I can confirm, lighter guns are faster to handle, and heavy guns are sluggish. I do think it's a good game mechanic, but it sure does take some getting used to. No other game I played has a system like this one. It makes for quite an interesting balancing dynamic too. A heavy gun might have really good DPS, but the low ergonomic rating will make it a pain to swing around and aim with. I really like what they're going for here. It's quite immersive. But at the same time, I do feel like the sluggishness is a bit exaggerated. These guns may be heavy, but they're not that heavy, especially since these guys are elite units. They should be able to swing around these heavy guns with relative ease. Or actually, maybe the sluggishness does make perfect sense. A lot of these guns are oversized and unnecessarily heavy after all, but if the guns were appropriately sized, then they wouldn't be so sluggish. So I think they should slim up all the guns and increase the ergonomics to make them a bit easier to handle. The good news is that you can upgrade the ergonomics by using a Magpul angled foregrip. It's kind of funny to see how they copied it nearly 1-to-1, but I don't see a problem with that. It's kind of cool. The Magpul angled foregrip is eternal. What I do have a problem with is that it only increases your ergonomic rating. It doesn't affect the recoil at all. Well, actually, it does affect the recoil. It makes the recoil worse. Now that is just a load of baloney. They got this shit totally backwards. Angled grips are better for recoil, while vertical grips are better for comfort. Angled grips allow you to get a firm and aggressive grip, which decreases the recoil. But doing an aggressive grip like that can exhaust your arm over a long period of time. Vertical grips, on the other hand, give you a lower, more relaxed grip, so you can chill out and swing the gun around without exhausting yourself too much. So the angled grip should actually be the one reducing recoil, while the vertical grip should increase ergonomics. I wouldn't give a recoil penalty to the vertical grip though. It should either be neutral or have a very minor reduction to recoil. Anyway, I do like the dynamic they're going for here. The Counter Sniper has more damage, but it's heavier and more cumbersome. By default, it's kitted out with a 10-time scope, a fat muzzle brake, a palm shelf pistol grip, and a marksman-style stock with a cheek rest. With all those attachments, it's clear that it's meant to be a true sniper. It's best for taking out medium-sized targets at long range from a stationary position. It's a bit too heavy and cumbersome to run and gun with it. I mean, you can do that. It's just kinda hard to swing around. I especially like the way this variant looks, too. It's got good style. Meanwhile, the regular Diligence is less damaging, but it's lighter and more maneuverable. It has a regular pistol grip, a collapsing stock, a 4-time scope, and by default, there is no muzzle brake. It's best used for taking out lighter targets while on the move. It's more like a battle rifle, not a heavy sniper. Unlike the regular Diligence, the Counter Sniper is actually a decent weapon. It does 200 damage and has medium penetration. I can't say it's that great for bugs or Illuminate. It's simply too slow and doesn't have the capacity to deal with them. But it does excel at taking out medium-sized bots. Provided that you shoot them in the face, it's a one-shot kill. It's especially good for killing Scout Striders. Their exposed rockets are super easy to hit. All it takes is one bullet, and they explode. It can be really hard to hit those tiny robot heads in the chaos of Super Helldive though. The sluggish handling doesn't help either. You can't snap onto heads like you're a member of the AIM community. You gotta be really slow and methodical. So if you don't have the discipline and patience to hit those weak points, then this gun is absolutely terrible. With regular body shots, it takes a lot of bullets. But for a high skill player, yeah, the counter sniper is pretty darn good. Some people may say it's an S-tier weapon for bots, and I do agree that it's a good gun, but it's also severely underpowered at the same time. This is how the regular Diligence should perform. The counter sniper is the higher caliber variant, so it should be dealing way more damage. It's chambered in 9x70mm, and the bullet weighs 20 grams. If we translate that to freedom units, it's very similar in size to a 300 grain 338 Lapua. The in-game round is just 1mm longer and about half a millimeter wider, and the bullet is slightly heavier at 308 grains. A 300 grain 338 travels at 2,800 feet per second, while this one travels at over 3,000 feet per second. So I think it's fair to say, this round is even more powerful than 338. And 338 Lapua is an absolute monster of a round. It's always hard to quantify this stuff and put it into video game numbers, but I'd say 338 should deal at least twice as much damage as 308. So based on my super scientific calculations, the regular Diligence should deal 225 damage, and the counter sniper should do 450. Even if you want to round down for balancing reasons, the lowest number should be 200 and 400. Or actually, these guns should deal the same damage, because they use the same cartridge. The Diligence isn't chambered in 308 like I assumed. Both these guns use 9x70. The only difference is that the counter sniper is using a high velocity version, so that explains why they give it higher damage and higher penetration. I guess the regular Diligence should deal 400 then, and the counter sniper should do 450. That may seem like a really high number, but I mean, it should be. It's a sniper rifle using a borderline anti-material round. 338 can smash through concrete and level 4 plates no problem, and the damage it deals to raw flesh is absolutely brutal. So in combination with increasing the damage, they should also greatly increase the penetration. The regular Diligence has low penetration, which is the same as a pistol round. That is comically low for how powerful this round would actually be. This ain't no 9mm pistol round, it's a 9mm sniper round. It's way bigger. This is the type of 9mm that could literally blow the lung out the body. The counter sniper specifically has medium penetration, so that's better, but it's still way too low. There's no two ways about it. This bullet should have high penetration. Or if they rework the whole penetration system, then the counter sniper should have level 4, very high penetration, and the regular Diligence would have level 3, high penetration. Whoever balanced the Diligence rifles needs to be court-martialed for treason. It's criminal how underpowered these guns are. You'd think they would have buffed them with the recent balancing update. A whole slew of guns got buffed, but these guns didn't get touched at all. The regular Diligence in particular is absolutely useless. It should be the perfect battle rifle for killing medium-sized bots, but it's barely able to kill bugs without the bullets bouncing off. The counter sniper is better. It can one-shot medium-sized bots if you have supreme aim, but that shouldn't be the intended role of this rifle. If it was shooting 308, then yeah, 200 damage with medium penetration seems fair. But this gun ain't shooting 308, it's shooting 9x70, which is more powerful than 338 Lapua. When you account for that, then yeah, it's severely underpowered. This gun shouldn't be limited to only killing medium-sized bots. It should also be able to take on heavy units like War Striders and Hulks. As is, it's completely useless against those bigger enemies. The bullets just bounce right off. So here's how it should work. The regular Diligence should be chambered for a lighter round. It should be a 308 battle rifle, not a heavy 338 sniper. A smaller round would fit its intended role much better. You don't really see anyone running around with a 338. 308 is the highest you can go for a battle rifle. Past that, and the weight and recoil is just too high for it to be practical. So in this case, let's make up a new round called 7x55. It should deal 225 damage and have high penetration. It would be the perfect rifle for taking down medium-sized enemies, but it would be useless against heavy units. So basically, the regular Diligence should perform how the counter sniper does. And since we're reworking it to be a true battle rifle, it should also have the option for full auto with a fire rate of 550 rounds per minute. Combined with 225 damage, that would give it a super high DPS of 2062. To keep it in check, the recoil should be greatly increased. As is, this gun recoils like a wimpy 5.56. In reality, a full-size rifle round has way more recoil. They call it 308 for a reason, because it's violent. 308 battle rifles may have the capability for full auto, but they're mostly used in semi. The recoil is simply too high to be precise. You gotta be highly skilled to control it. Basically, the full auto option is there for when you need to spray and pray at close range, and that option would be mighty useful in Helldivers when you get swarmed by a bunch of bugs. So yes, the full auto option would make the DPS really high, but you would have to be highly skilled to make use of it. Meanwhile, the counter sniper is the higher caliber long range sniper model. It's chambered in 9x70 and should be semi-auto only. It should deal 450 damage and have very high penetration. And again, to balance it out, they should drastically increase the recoil. As is, this gun recoils like a silent fart, when it should kick like a mule. The counter sniper should almost perform like an anti-material rifle. It should decimate medium-sized targets in one shot, and it should also be able to take on heavy units. It wouldn't be nearly as effective as the actual anti-material rifle, but it should be able to damage their weak points and chip away at their health. They should also increase the width of the magazine to fit this big-ass round. As is, it don't really look like this could hold a cartridge that's 70mm long. It looks like a 308 mag, so that's why I assumed the regular Diligence was using a cartridge similar to 308. Okay, I think I got that all sorted out now. That may have been a little bit repetitive and disorganized, but fuck it. This video is already over 2 hours long, so I'm guessing you guys aren't too worried about me trying super duper hard to make it as condensed as possible. In fact, I bet most of you guys are watching this in the background, or sleeping. Wake up! Anyway, hopefully the guys at Arrowhead see this video and make those changes, because right now, these guns, kinda suck. At the very least, the counter sniper is usable. I can kill bots with it pretty good. It's well balanced as a battle rifle, but it shouldn't be a battle rifle. It should be a heavy sniper. The design is mostly good. I'll give it a B tier rating in that aspect. But the performance is highly unimmersive. So for that, I'll give the counter sniper a 2-star performance rating. It's a niche tool for doming clankers. Now, let's move on to the shotguns. This one is called the SG-225 Breaker. It's a full-auto magazine-fed shotgun. It looks like they took the Diligence, made it fatter, and rechambered it for 12 gauge. I like the overall aesthetic of the Diligence, but man, when they transformed it into the Breaker, they made it fat as fuck. Just like your mother, this gun is comically obese. It looks more like a Fortnite gun than a sci-fi space gun. I also think it's kinda lame that it's basically a slightly altered reskin. There's nothing inherently wrong with using a gun as a central platform for different calibers. It's very common with real guns because it's efficient. But for a video game, I would rather see unique designs that stand out. Then again, Helldivers are all about efficiency and utility, so you know what? Yeah. It does fit the game, but still, they really need to slim this one down. And just like with the Diligence, they should swap the charging handle to the left side. That underhanded reach around looks even more awkward on the Breaker because of how chunky it is. At this point, it would probably be easier to reach over the handguard instead of under it. And funnily enough, that is how the animation plays out in third person. So the reload is totally different, depending on what perspective you play in. Perhaps they hired the animators from Starfield to work on this one. I don't think this design is unsalvageable, it's just kinda boring. If it were up to me, I would rework this gun to look more like the Fostech Origin 12. It's a boxy, sci-fi looking design, so it fits perfectly into Helldivers. This gun is freaking badass. It's way cooler than the Fortnite looking Breaker. But in terms of performance, the Breaker is pretty awesome. It can deal up to 330 damage if you land every pellet, and it chugs along at 300 rounds per minute. That means the DPS potential is 1650, which makes it one of the highest damaging primaries in the whole game. I wouldn't say it's overpowered though. It seems well balanced. If anything, they should actually buff the damage to 400 to match the Punisher. I don't see why the Punisher deals more damage if they're both chambered in 12 gauge. Well, these shotguns may be the same gauge, but they don't use the same exact load. The Punisher has 9 pellets per shell, which lines up with double-aught buckshot. Meanwhile, the Breaker has 11 pellets per shell, which lines up with single-aught buckshot, and single-aught pellets are smaller than double-aught. So that explains why the Breaker does less damage. But how come they force you to use single-aught? Why can't I load it with pissin' hot triple-aught magnum loads and make it turbo OP? Well, because this is a video game, and they have to balance it out somehow. But you have to admit, it sure would be awesome if you could use the Breaker with more powerful loads. The fire rate could use a buff too. It's capped at 300, so it feels really sluggish. The Breaker is so slow that I tend to pull the trigger for each shot, as if it were semi-auto. If you want, you can switch it to semi-auto, but it's still clunky as hell because the gun can't keep up with your trigger finger. It's capped at 300 rounds per minute either way. It's kinda lame how this full auto shotgun shoots slower than a semi-auto. To be fair, the real-life AA-12 shoots at 300 rounds per minute, and the reason why is because it helps keep the recoil manageable. 12 gauge kicks pretty hard, so if you try to shoot it at 800 rounds per minute, like a typical machine gun, it would buck you around like a bull. So yes, there is a very practical reason to have the fire rate be this slow. But at the same time, I do wish it was a little bit faster. That would be a lot more fun. Helldivers are Super Earth's finest, so that extra bit of recoil shouldn't be a big problem. The USAS-12, for example, shoots at 400 rounds per minute, so I think they should increase the fire rate to 400, maybe 350 at the very least. Or actually, it could be even higher. With my Sega 12, for example, it's semi-automatic, and I'm able to fire it at about 360 rounds per minute, but other guns can run even faster. The Origin 12 is perhaps the fastest firing shotgun. It can fire as fast as you can pull the trigger. So, effectively, the max fire rate is around 500 rounds per minute. I think they should do the same for the Breaker. In semi-auto, the potential fire rate would be 500, but in full auto, it would chug along at 350. That would make for quite an interesting gameplay mechanic. You can effortlessly hold down the trigger to get a slow and steady fire rate, or you can spam the trigger yourself to squeeze out that extra bit of DPS. All those changes might make the Breaker overpowered, but they could balance it out in other ways, like by giving it higher recoil and a lower ergonomics rating. For this shotgun especially, with how huge it is, it would be quite sluggish to handle. It looks like it has the same agility as that one fat chick on the cheer team. The DPS might be really high on paper, but in practice, you can't always make use of it. The Breaker is really good at tearing through waves of small bugs, but it struggles to break the big ones. That's because it only has light penetration, so the pellets bounce right off enemies with medium armor. And when shooting light armor, it will penetrate, but it'll deal reduced damage. If you try to kill an enemy by hitting them in lightly armored areas, it may take a whole magazine or even more to put them down. It's best to target specific weak points to get around armor, but it's kinda hard to be pinpoint accurate with buckshot. I don't think that's a problem though. That is pretty darn immersive. Shotguns are absolutely devastating against fleshy targets, but pellets aren't very good for piercing armor. They're slow-moving round balls, and slow-moving balls don't penetrate very good. For that, you need a pointy bullet that moves really fast. So that's the trade-off. Shotguns have stupid high damage, but they're only effective at close range and can't penetrate armor. And when I say close range, I don't mean point blank. I'm talking like 25 to 50 yards. But in most video games, shotguns are point blank gimmick weapons. They have comically wide spread and severe damage drop-off. For most video game shotguns, they're only useful under 15 yards. It may seem insane to people who've only used shotguns in video games, but in real life, their effective range is closer to 50 yards, not 15. Shotguns have much tighter spreads than what video games show. At 25 yards, a shotgun can get all or nearly all its pellets on target, and at 50, it can get about half. This does vary greatly depending on factors like barrel length, choke, and what specific load you're using. But you know what I mean. Shotguns aren't completely useless at range. So I'm really glad to say that the shotguns in Helldivers 2 have realistic range. You can easily reach out to 50 yards and one-tap tiny bugs. You can smash those little buggers even at 100. Should you use the Breaker to snipe big bugs though? Nah. It's mostly a waste of ammunition. It can kill them, but it just takes a lot more shots. Just like a real shotgun, it is most effective under 25. With these shotguns, you have to be at least somewhat accurate because the spreads are fairly tight, and you can make them even tighter by using a choke. The half choke slightly reduces the spread, and the full choke narrows it down even more. I always like running the full choke, so I can get as many pellets on target as possible. It makes these shotguns even better for medium range and for targeting weak points. The spread is still slightly too wide for my liking, but that does make sense. This is a short barrel shotgun. Shorter barrels have wider spreads, while longer barrels produce narrow spreads. It would be awesome if there's customization options for the barrel, but sadly, there's not. You're stuck with the same length your whole life, and there is nothing you can do about it. So when you consider that this is a short barrel shotgun, it might actually have too much range. I tested the range on my teammate, and turns out you can easily one-tap a Helldiver at 80 meters. That's assuming you get a pellet or two to the face. But still, that's absolutely insane. Even with body shots, the Breaker is extremely lethal at range. At 75, it'll delete almost their entire health bar. Even at 100, it can cut their HP in half in just one shot. God bless this man's sacrifice. This information will contribute greatly to Super Earth's cause. So when it comes to the effective range on a fellow Helldiver, yeah, the Breaker is absolutely broken. Being able to two-shot someone 100 meters out with a fully automatic shotgun is supremely busted. I can't believe I'm saying it, but it seems like these shotguns have unrealistically high range. Well, not really. I'm messing around. The breaker isn't actually turbo OP. When using it against enemies, it's fairly balanced. It just so happens that every single gun in the game is extremely lethal against Helldivers. So the guns aren't the problem. The problem is that Helldivers have paper skin and glass bones. Helldivers have 125 HP, which is a normal looking number, but the way they balance the guns isn't normal. In most games, the standard assault rifle would deal around 30 damage, but in Helldivers, it's 90. So that means you can potentially one-shot a Helldiver if you shoot them in the chest and let them bleed out. Even with limb shots, all it takes is 2 bullets to the knees, and they die instantly. You'd think this futuristic armor would be able to stop an intermediate rifle round, but it seems like Super Earth has been making it out of tissue paper to save money. This is consistent across all the guns. They're pretty much all 1 or 2 shot kills. Maybe 3 or 4 if it's at long range with a pistol. And of course, it's the same deal when getting hit by enemies. Most of the time, you'll die in 3 hits or less. They really ought to buff our HP, so we aren't so fragile. The breaker deals 330 damage with all the pellets combined. So when I was shooting my teammate here, obviously, not all the pellets were landing. At 75, it was probably 3. And at 100, I'm guessing only 1 or 2 pellets landed. That spread lines up pretty close with reality. So yeah, this shotgun is pretty darn realistic after all. The design is kinda doo-doo. It looks too much like a toy for me to take it seriously. So, in that aspect, I'll put the breaker in D tier. But the performance is epic and mostly realistic. My only complaint is that it's artificially limited to using a less powerful load, but I can see why that was done for the sake of gameplay balancing. And Helldivers 2 is one of the few video games where shotguns are actually useful at range. So for that, I'll be nice and give the breaker a 4-star performance rating. It's an epic tool for slaughtering the enemies of democracy. Next is the Spray and Pray, which is a variant of the breaker. This one comes with a tactical stock, an extended handguard, a drum mag, and a duckbill by default. I know it sounds funny, but it is a real thing. This type of muzzle device flattens the spread like a pancake. That makes it more useful for taking out targets in a wide horizontal plane. Besides attachments, the big difference with this variant is the damage and fire rate. The regular breaker deals 330 damage and shoots at 300 rounds per minute, while the Spray and Pray deals 240 damage and shoots at 330 rounds per minute. So it's slightly faster, but the difference in damage is huge. I'm not a big fan of this type of balancing logic, where they decrease the damage the higher the fire rate is. It's not very balanced. It just makes this gun weak. It's not like the DPS values are balanced. The DPS of the Spray and Pray is about 300 points lower, so I don't see much reason to use the Spray and Pray over the regular breaker then. Sure, it does come with a drum magazine by default, so you don't have to grind for it, but once you get the drum magazine for the regular breaker, it totally outclasses the Spray and Pray. Well, there's still 2 small advantages with the Spray and Pray. It has slightly less recoil, and you can carry more ammunition. You see, the Spray and Pray isn't using buckshot like the breaker, it's using birdshot. So that explains why the damage is lower. Buckshot pellets are huge, while birdshot pellets are tiny, and there's lots of variation. You can get microscopic birdshot with hundreds of pellets per shell, or you can get relatively large birdshot with under 100 pellets. Even if we assume the Spray and Pray is using the biggest birdshot, it would be completely useless for killing the enemies in Helldivers. As you can tell from the name, birdshot is for killing birds, not giant fucking bugs. It's not very effective for killing large game. Don't get me wrong, birdshot still really hurts, and it can be lethal, especially at point blank, but anything beyond that, and it's basically like throwing grains of sand. So, funnily enough, this gun is monstrously overpowered for using birdshot. It should be dealing like 100 damage max, not 240. That would make it completely useless, but I don't know why the hell they use birdshot for killing aliens in the first place. Double-aught buckshot should be the bare minimum. Or if anything, they should use a new shot shell called Bugshot. That would be pretty funny. I vote that they rename the shotgun ammunition to Bugshot. Well, turns out they lied. The Spray and Pray isn't using birdshot at all. There's simply no way. It has 16 pellets per shell. So this is buckshot then. Number 1 buckshot specifically, which is kinda niche. You don't really see that every day. Double-aught buckshot is considered the standard for combat use, and that should be the bare minimum for killing big aliens. Or maybe they should be using bigger gauges, like 10, 8, maybe even 4 for the really big fuckers. Better yet, they should give us a punt gun stratagem, so we can clear out all the flying fuckers in one shot. A punt gun stratagem would be supremely awesome. For what it is, I do like how the Spray and Pray plays. The higher fire rate and lower recoil makes it more enjoyable to shoot than the regular breaker. It's still pretty good for clearing out the endless waves of voteless and small bugs. I suppose that's the intended purpose of this shotgun. It's not meant to kill big bugs or overseers, just the little small shits. All they need to do then is rename the ammunition. This ain't no birdshot, it's #1 buckshot. With this one especially, they should bump up the fire rate even more. If it were shooting at 500 rounds per minute, that would be dope as fuck. With the fire rate that high, it would truly live up to its name as the spray and pray. It would be an absolute shredder. It's shooting a lighter load, so a Helldiver should be able to handle the recoil perfectly fine. But ultimately, I feel like the spray and pray is kinda redundant. It's just a slightly shittier version of the regular breaker. I get that the intended purpose is to clear out small enemies, but why would they focus on that when the big enemies are the real problem? And sure, the extra ammunition can come in handy, cause with the regular breaker, you can easily run out and get pinned down with no resupply. But if that ever happens, just throw a 500 kilo bomb at your feet and sacrifice yourself for democracy. In some cases, it's more cost effective to send in a new Helldiver than to resupply them. So I feel like the spray and pray could be deleted entirely, and nothing of value would be lost. I don't see why they have to make an entirely different gun if all they're doing is changing the ammunition. They should just make it to where you can switch between ammo types on the fly. In the end, I shall put the spray and pray in D tier and give it a 2.5 star rating for performance. It's a decent tool for pest control. For yet another variant, we have the Breaker Incendiary. I don't have much to add about this one. It's the same shotgun, but it casts fireballs instead of shooting regular pellets. So obviously, they painted it orange so the user knows it's a fire shotgun. Otherwise, our tiny pea brains would have no clue that it shoots fire rounds. Like, come on, that's just silly. The Breaker already looks like a toy, and the orange paint literally turns it into a Nerf gun. Just like the Concussive Liberator, this variant has a magical canister that imbues the pellets with fire, instead of the shells themselves being Dragon's Breath rounds. That's kinda cringe if you ask me. I'm not a big fan of having random magical doohickeys that imbue the bullets with effects. Why go out of your way to make this magical contraption that imbues bullets with effects, when you could just make the bullets have those effects? In terms of performance, I guess the Incendiary is okay, but it's more like a typical video game shotgun with comically widespread and short range. These pellets are super slow and they drop like rocks. To be fair, Dragon's Breath does have less effective range than regular buckshot, but the range penalty shouldn't be this bad. I guess it's good for super close range, but anything beyond that, and you're just throwing a pyrotechnic show for the bugs. It doesn't help that the base damage is so low. It's 240, the same as the spray and pray. I suppose they had to nerf the base damage to balance it out, cause if they kept the damage the same while applying the fire damage on top of it, then it would be way too overpowered compared to the regular breaker. But in this case, I think they nerfed it too hard. It does 240 ballistic damage and 100 fire damage, so in total, that's 340. Just 10 points higher than the regular breaker. Is that extra 10 points of damage really worth it? No. It takes time for that fire damage to kick in, and I would rather kill enemies instantly when they're bum rushing me. Combine that with its comically widespread, and you won't be able to take advantage of its full damage potential anyway. So, on paper, your DPS might be slightly higher with the Incendiary, but in practice, the spread and range drop-off makes it way worse than the regular breaker. It doesn't help that the Incendiary is limited to a 2-round burst, which is really odd to see on a shotgun. Burst fire is common with rifles, but I have never heard of a burst fire shotgun. I don't know why the hell they did that. The purpose of burst fire is to help the user conserve ammunition and be more accurate at long range, while still providing a decent volume of fire. For the most part, full auto is not viable for long range. The recoil just throws you off too much, but a quick control burst can be fairly accurate. So why would this ever be necessary for a shotgun? Long-range accuracy isn't the main goal, especially since this particular Incendiary shotgun has such a short range. Maybe it's for conserving ammunition then? But they also gave it a drum mag by default, so I don't think that's the case either. According to the description, the purpose of the burst fire is to keep the gun from overheating. I guess that makes sense. The fire rounds would make it run hotter, but that's not actually reflected in the gameplay. If you switch to semi, you can shoot it just as fast as the regular breaker, and it never overheats. There is no overheat mechanic for the regular guns. That only applies to the laser weapons. I would support them adding a heat mechanic to the regular guns though. That would be supremely immersive. But right now, this description is just a load of baloney. The truth is, the developers just hate fun, and they don't want you to use an epic full-auto fire shotgun. So, the only advantage with the Incendiary is that it comes with a drum magazine by default. That may make it enticing for newer players, but trust me, it's a noob trap. Once you get the drum magazine for the regular breaker, there's just no reason to use the Incendiary. To make it more useful, they ought to buff the base damage and tighten the spread. It doesn't have to be the exact same as the regular breaker, but it should be enough to make it competitive. Fire shotguns are supposed to feel badass and powerful, but this one is a lame duck. I can understand they had to balance it out, but if you ask me, the Incendiary should be a direct upgrade. Instead of making it a separate weapon, the Dragon's Breath round should be an upgrade for the Breaker that you can only unlock after getting it to level 20 or something. For looking like a Nerf toy with a goofy, bulbous contraption, I'm gonna have to drop the Breaker Incendiary down to F tier. And for being such a lame fire shotgun, I'll give it 2 stars, I guess. It's a decent tool for heating up mom's leftovers. Next is the SG-8 Punisher. It's a bullpup pump-action shotgun that's heavily based on the UTS-15, and I can see why they copied the gun so closely. The UTS-15 looks like it was taken from a sci-fi space movie. It's really boxy and bulky, so it's a perfect fit for the aesthetics of Helldivers 2. But in terms of performance, well, I haven't heard anything good about them. The actions are really stiff, and they're heavily prone to jamming, which is kinda crazy. Pump-action shotguns are usually extremely reliable and resilient, so how do you manage to make an unreliable pump shotgun with cheap materials and the power of supreme Turkish engineering? That's how. Turkish-made shotguns are infamous for being exceptionally cheap and shitty, so of course Super Earth would choose the Turkish UTS-15 as their standard-issue shotgun. These guys fucking love shitty guns. To make the Punisher extra immersive, they should give it a high chance to jam. That would be awesome. I would literally die from the high levels of immersion. But assuming they could straighten out the quality control, then I think the design and concept is pretty decent. The cool thing about the UTS is that it has count 'em, two magazine tubes, so it has double the capacity. With 2 7-round tubes, that's 14 shells in total. Combined with its bullpup layout, it's relatively short, all while having a high capacity and a standard length barrel. A traditional shotgun with the same barrel length would have an 8-round capacity at best. However, that dual tube design is probably also the reason why the UTS-15 jams so much. The gun has to feed from 2 different magazines into 1 chamber, so as you can imagine, that's a little bit more complicated than just making a regular shotgun that feeds from a single tube. Another point of failure could be the windowed magazine tube. It looks cool, and it allows you to see how many rounds are left in the magazine, but an exposed magazine could also allow dirt and dust to get in there and possibly cause a malfunction. Ideally, the magazine should be closed off so there's no chance of anything getting in there. But if they really want to keep the windowed magazine, then they should at least cover it up with a translucent material. This design can work, it just has to be made with proper quality control. But higher quality means higher cost, and you gotta trade one for the other. You can't have a high-quality shotgun with an innovative design that's both cheap and reliable. You gotta pick one, and it seems Utah's chose a lower price tag over quality. That seems to be the case with Super Earth as well. They intentionally pick out shitty guns. In terms of performance, the Punisher is straight doo-doo. It's totally inferior to the Breaker. The only thing going for it is the raw base damage. The Punisher deals 405 damage, while the Breaker deals 330. But the Punisher is severely limited by its pump action mechanism. The fire rate is 80, so the DPS is 539. That makes it one of the worst primaries in the whole game. Meanwhile, the Breaker has a DPS of 1650. It's 3 times better than the Punisher, and it's easily one of the best primaries in the whole game. The Punisher's tube-fed magazine ain't helping either. It has a capacity of 16, which is relatively high for a tube-fed shotgun, but it's still a tube-fed, so the reload is way slower than a box magazine. And since there's so many shells, the whole reload can take a few business days to complete. Well, if you compare it to real life, the reload is actually crazy fast for a tube fed. The shells magically spawn from your palm, and you can slide them in super smooth with no resistance. In reality, reloading a tube fed magazine can be a little tricky. It takes a lot of practice to get good at it. So if anything, this slow-ass reload is still way too fast. But I don't really mind it. If they made the reload realistic, then this gun would suck even harder. Or actually, it is possible to load a tube shotgun super quick. It's a technique called dual loading. You flip the shotgun upside down, put 2 shells front to back, and shove them both in at the same time. That basically doubles your reload speed, and you can double it again with quad loading. It's like dual loading, but you fill your hand with another pair of shells. It's freaking genius. With quad loading, a tube-fed shotgun can be reloaded in just a couple seconds. Another option is to use a speed loader. And yes, tube-fed speed loaders are a thing. If you get real good with them, you can reload a tube-fed shotgun in a split second. The Punisher especially would benefit greatly from a speed loader since it has such a large capacity. So when you're completely empty, you don't have to sit there for 10 seconds to reload all 16 shells individually. The speed loader would reduce that down to like 2 seconds. If your magazine is only partially empty though, that's when you would do dual loading or quad loading, depending on how many shots you fired. There's plenty of ways to speed up the Punisher's reload, besides giving it a goofy sped-up animation. They should change the technique entirely. As to why the developers didn't implement any of this, I don't know, maybe they just want us to suffer. To make matters worse, the Breaker has access to a 26-round drum, while the Punisher has no option for a magazine extension. So, on paper, the DPS may be 3 times lower, but when you account for the slower reload and the lower capacity, it's more like 5 times lower. It's much worse than you think. So, the Punisher is absolutely useless. This gun ain't punishing nobody but the player. It's so painful to use that I would rather spend 25 hours a day at the ball-crushing factory. But in all fairness, the lackluster performance is very immersive. Obviously, a full-auto drum-mag shotgun is going to have a way higher DPS than a pump shotgun. There's just no getting around that. You would have to artificially nerf the auto shotgun, or artificially buff the pump shotgun to balance them out. They already have an artificial damage buff on the Punisher, and it's still totally outclassed. It's just the way they made the Punisher, it was set up to fail. There is no reason to use a tube-fed pump shotgun when you have access to a drum-fed auto shotty. And why would they still be using tube-fed pump shotguns in the 22nd century? At this point, you'd think they'd be running external magazines only. External magazines are just better in every way. They have higher capacities, and it makes the reload way faster. But there is one potential downside with an external magazine. They're not always reliable. Automatic shotguns with external magazines especially can be a little finicky and prone to jamming. You gotta run the right load to cycle them properly, and the magazines themselves can have issues feeding the rounds in the first place. But once you figure out the perfect setup, then they should be fairly reliable. Mostly. So that's why tube-fed pump shotguns are still in common use. They are 100% reliable, and they never jam. Well, unless you buy a shitty Turkish-made gun, that is. In the future, though, I'd assume they'd have all these issues ironed out, but I wouldn't be surprised if tube-fed pump shotguns are still in common use. They'd be best suited for roles like hunting and policing, though, not for fighting endless waves of giant bugs. They shouldn't even consider pump shotguns. Maybe for low difficulty missions, but for super helldive, that's a hell no. Loading one round at a time is a huge disadvantage in terms of speed, but there is one tiny advantage. You'll conserve more ammunition in the long run. Helldivers 2 has an immersive magazine mechanic. You don't draw ammunition from a giant pool with infinite magazines that magically reload themselves. You drop in with individual magazines, and once you drop those magazines, they're gone. If you reload with only half the magazine spent, those bullets don't go back into your inventory. They get dropped onto the ground, and you can't pick them back up. I like the idea here. It's very immersive that the ammunition is tied to the magazine, but at the same time, it's kinda silly that you can't save your partially spent magazines. There's nothing physically stopping you from doing so. I've seen other games implement a system that allows you to hold onto your magazines and use them later, so it's not like this mechanic is impossible to make. I guess the reasoning for Helldivers 2 is that the combat is so chaotic that you don't have enough time to put the magazine back in the pouch. You just gotta dump it and run. And yeah, that does happen a lot, but what about the moments when there's nothing going on? Assuming you're not actively in combat, then you should absolutely be able to hold onto that magazine for later. In the grand scheme of things, I guess it's not a huge deal. There's plenty of ammo boxes across the map, and you can always call in resupplies. But there are some cases where I've run out of ammo entirely because I dared to do a partial reload, or I reloaded early on accident. So, funnily enough, the absence of this mechanic gives one small advantage to the Punisher and other guns with internal magazines. Still though, it's not nearly enough to make it useful. To balance it out, I guess they could give the Breaker a higher chance to jam, but there's no jam mechanic in Helldivers 2, so that's not an option. And if anything, the Punisher would be the gun with the higher failure rate. The only way to make the Punisher viable then is to increase the damage. They would have to artificially pump it up to 500 or even more. They would have to make it use a more powerful load to justify the increase in damage. Right now, it appears to be using double-aught buckshot with 9 pellets per shell. I think they should make it use triple-aught buck. Those pellets are slightly bigger and more powerful. A typical triple-aught load would have 8 pellets per shell, but you can get triple-aught magnum, which is a little bit longer and has 10 pellets per shell. That shit hits hard. If double-aught buck does 405 damage, then I say triple-aught magnum should deal around 550. Now that would make the Punisher powerful. They could also increase the fire rate. 80 rounds per minute is fairly typical for a pump gun, but pro pumpers can pump them much faster. 3 shots per second, or 180 rounds per minute, is very possible. It just takes practice and a very smooth action. Super Earth ought to get these Helldivers in a rigorous left-handed pumping routine. They need to double the fire rate on their pump guns. Well, they don't have to literally double it with the Punisher. Higher recoiling load would make it harder to pump that fast. So let's just bump it up to 120 for now. With 550 damage and a fire rate of 1 120. That would give the Punisher a DPS of 1100, which is more than double what it is now. That huge buff would make the Punisher into a viable weapon. It would be the go-to choice for slow firing, but hard-hitting shotgun. Meanwhile, the Breaker would be dealing less damage per shot, but it would still have the edge in terms of overall DPS and reload speed. They could also reduce the spread to make the damage more consistent. Right now, it's simply too wide to hit all your pellets, so most of the time, you're not even getting a full 405 damage. I haven't done any extensive testing, but it almost feels like the Punisher has a wider spread than the Breaker. It should be the other way around, because the Punisher has a longer barrel. The Punisher may have the same overall length as the Breaker, but it's a bullpup, so the barrel length is actually longer. With all those improvements, the Punisher would be a formidable pump shotty, but right now, it seems like the developers balanced it as a shitty meme gun. I think the outward design is okay, even if it's based on a terrible real-life gun. The design could be perfectly functional if it's made with proper quality control. So, funnily enough, I'll give this design an A-tier rating. As usual, my bigger beef with this gun is the poor balancing and lackluster performance. Pump shotguns are supposed to be awesome and powerful, but this one is lame as hell. To be fair, it is realistic for the Punisher to be way worse than the Breaker, so I guess I should give it a high rating for being realistic then? But that's because this gun is artificially limited to loading double-aught buck 1 by 1. You should be able to load it with triple-aught magnum with a speed loader. So, no. I'll give the Punisher a low 2-star performance rating then. It is unfit for slaughtering the enemies of democracy. We've also got the SG-8 Slugger, which is a variant of the Punisher that uses rifled slugs. Like I've said before, I think it's kinda silly that they have to make entirely new guns when all they're doing is changing the ammunition. It'd be a lot cooler if you could switch between ammunition types on the go, especially for a shotgun. Shotguns are extremely versatile. There's buckshot, slugs, flechettes, even the forbidden explosive frag rounds. Imagine how awesome it would be if you could choose whatever load you wanted. And seeing as this gun has 2 separate magazine tubes, it'd be pretty neat if you could load them with different ammo types. One side could be buckshot, and the other side could be slugs. Or, one side could be flechettes, and the other side could be explosive frag rounds. Man, my ideas are awesome. Arrowhead should hire me to be the director for gameplay and balancing. If that were the case, this game would be perfect and have no issues whatsoever. I would make sure that everyone would love playing this game, because all the dissenters would be shot. But no, we're stuck with 1 ammo type per gun for now. Anyway, when it comes to the Slugger, the main visual difference is that it has a slightly longer barrel and magazine tube. The longer barrel would give the slugs a tiny boost in velocity, and the extended magazine tube allows it to use longer shells while still retaining the same capacity. The regular Punisher uses typical 2 3/4 inch shells, while the Slugger uses 3-inch shells. And hey, that's what I said the regular Punisher should be using. They should go ahead and make both of these guns use 3-inch shells. The regular Punisher would use triple-aught magnum buckshot, while the Slugger would be using 3-inch slugs, of course. 3-inch slugs especially are pretty gnarly. Now this is exactly the type of ammunition they should be using to kill giant bugs and communist robots. You'd think these 3-inch rifled slugs would be devastating in game, but sadly, the performance is kinda lame. The damage is 330. That does seem like a solid number, but it's way too low for a 3-inch slug. The relatively low damage combined with the slow fire rate gives the Slugger one of the worst DPS stats in the whole game. The numbers may look abysmal, because they are, but in practice, I actually found the Slugger to be slightly more useful than the regular Punisher, especially when fighting against the bots. It can easily one-shot medium-sized bots in the face. It also has medium armor penetration, so the slugs won't bounce off their bodies like with the regular buckshot. And since it's a single projectile, you don't have to worry about a wide spread reducing the effectiveness at range. You can snipe with the Slugger pretty dang good. It may not be the best tool for sniping, but one thing's for sure, doming clinkers at 100 yards with the shotgun is supremely fun. The choice for rifled slugs specifically was a great decision. Normal slugs are great for extending the effective range of a shotgun, but past 100 yards and the accuracy really starts to drop off. That's because shotguns have smooth bores, so naturally, they aren't going to be very accurate for long range. Meanwhile, normal guns have rifled barrels. A rifled barrel puts a spin on the projectile, which stabilizes it and makes it accurate. But shotguns can't really use rifled barrels, because they're designed to shoot a wide variety of ammunition with multiple projectiles. Ironically enough, a rifled barrel would mess up a shotgun spread and make it less accurate. But if you really want to, you can put a rifled barrel on a shotgun and use it as a dedicated slugger. That'll make your slugs more accurate, but the downside is that you can only use sabot slugs. So to keep a shotgun versatile, you can use rifled slugs. Instead of putting rifling on the barrel, it puts the rifling on the ammunition. It's freaking genius. So as you can guess, rifled slugs are far more accurate than regular slugs. You could probably reach up to 200 yards or more if you really tried. In Helldivers 2, the Slugger is pretty darn accurate. You don't gotta worry about the the slugs veering off into random directions. There is some drop to it though. It's a heavy-ass slug after all. But all it takes is a minor adjustment and you'll be dinging robot heads at a couple of football fields away. All we need now is a 10-time sniper scope to make that long-range slugging much easier. Currently, there's no option for a sniper scope, not even a 4-time scope. All we got is the 1.5 times optic. That's a huge letdown. Why would they give us a long-range slug shotgun without the ability to mount a big-ass scope on it? I can't truly enjoy long-range slugging unless I have a comically big scope to go with it. Another thing I noticed about this ammunition is that it's labeled as 10 gauge, but I thought the Punisher was supposed to be 12 gauge. It seems like this is either a typo or some kind of error. Just looking at the shells, they look like 3-inch 12 gauge shells. 10 gauge shells would be thicker and longer all around. But hey, I wouldn't be opposed to them rechambering the Punishers to 10 gauge. That would make them do big damage. And I like doing big damage. The Slugger could certainly use a buff. Considering that it's using 3-inch slugs, they should increase the damage to at least 500. And like I mentioned with the regular Punisher, they should increase the fire rate to 120. That would make the Slugger a truly epic slug shotgun. As is, it kinda sucks. But it's still slightly more useful than the regular Punisher. For design, the Slugger goes in A tier. For performance, it gets a 2.5 star rating. It's a fun toy for slugging clankers. The final Punisher variant is the SG-451 Cookout. As you can guess from the name, it shoots incendiary rounds. It's hard to give this gun a full review, because, I don't have it. Frankly, I don't feel like spending another $10 to unlock the war bond for it. Maybe I'll get to it eventually, but right now, it's a low priority war bond. I'm focusing on the good stuff first, and I already spent like an extra $60 on all these fucking war bonds. Anyway, when it comes to the Cookout's design, there's not much I can add here. It's just another Punisher variant. All they did was paint it orange, give it skeletonized grips, and a muzzle attachment. If it's anything like the Breaker Incendiary, then it probably sucks. And just looking at the stats, that does seem to be the case. I will put the Cookout in A tier for its design, but for performance, I guess I'll give it a 1.5 stars. This is entirely based on speculation, so if I'm wrong, feel free to shit on me in the comments. And that wraps up the first part of everything wrong with the guns in Helldivers 2. It's pretty crazy how it took me over 2 hours just to cover a dozen guns. I tried my absolute best to cut out unnecessary tangents and condense everything, but there was simply way too much stuff to talk about. As you can tell, this video in particular was quite the Herculean feat. It's by far the longest and most complicated video I've ever made. It took me over 4 months to cook up this bad boy, and that's including help from 2 editors. If you made it this far, it's very clear that you enjoy my content, so what are you waiting for? Go ahead and eagle strike that like button. There's still plenty more guns to cover in Helldivers 2, including all the support weapons, the energy weapons, and the never-ending flow of new war bond guns. So you better make sure that you're subscribed to stay up to date. If you don't subscribe, then bad things will happen. While you're at it, let me know what you think about the guns in Helldivers 2. Were you guys surprised at just how flawed they truly are? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Before we go, remember to try out WARTHUNDER with my links in the description. All new and returning players on PC and console who do so will get that sweet bonus pack. I have to give a humongous thanks to the guys at WARTHUNDER for continuing to sponsor the channel. Their support is what allows me to make these awesome videos.